Good morning, everyone. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. It is a early Monday. We are in the month of February, and I hope you guys are having a damn good February up to this point, coming in off of the weekend. Yeah, man, it is early. I'm sorry I was late. It's very loud out here sometimes. And for whatever particular reason, they decided to do trash now, in which case there's a blaring in the background. Hopefully it's not translating too bad. But no, man, I hope you guys are doing good. We have a really good show for you today. We have Mark Sleboda. He's coming on at 7:15. A little bit later in the show, Malik Abdul, the man himself. Malik has been on CNN recently, and he has been holding it down on CNN. Proud of my man. So good for him on that. We are also going to have KJ. Now, the reason that KJ is coming on is because Donald Trump has decided to initiate what is most likely the dumbest reason and rationale for a pointless trade war that anyone has ever thrown. Most countries try to avoid trade wars. That's why you make deals with other countries. And Trump has decided that he is effectively going to wage a trade war with pretty much the entire world. Put it in terms, he has initiated tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China. He has apparently gone after South Africa. This was something I just saw this morning, just out of the blue, saying South Africa is treating some of its population very bad, very bad. What I suspect is the racist president is looking at the ANC and feels some kind of way about some of the policies that the ANC may have that they know nothing about. And I suspect that that has a lot to do with Elon Musk, who are out there giving Nazi signals. They may have feelings about the fact that the South African government is in the hands of the ANC. I mean, I've met white South Africans in the past, and I can't necessarily say all of them hit with a broad stroke, but I have met some in the past that thought the system under apartheid was a better system, as opposed to having Black folks in charge. Is that the case? I don't know. Is it a coincidence that Elon Musk gave Donald Trump apparently $288 million, and now all of a sudden Donald Trump, out of the blue, without any evidence, without any information at all, is now going after South Africa? Yeah, I don't think those things are coincidental. So there's that. Apparently, this is also going to be aimed at Europe. So the European Union is apparently also going to be up for sanctions, or tariffs, as he calls them. And China. He's apparently even gone after China, putting an additional 10% of tariffs on China. This is absurd. This is absurd. People are trying to go with this magical point of view that this is somehow not going to affect anything, that it's in a little vacuum on its own, and that this is just going to happen, and that other countries are going to what? Eat the cost? They're not going to eat the cost. China and Mexico are going to do reciprocal sanctions. So is that's right, Canada and Mexico. So is China, by the way. In fact, not just reciprocal sanctions. China is actually taking the United States apparently to court over this, basically saying these sanctions are outrageous. This is also pretty astonishing when you consider that the last time Trump was in office, he redid NAFTA into his own deal. So it's like, it's an untrustworthy actor all the way through. Any deal that I make with you, you can renegotiate it on the whim when you just feel like you want to renegotiate that deal, meaning you can never necessarily negotiate in good faith, which I suppose that's what Russia is not necessarily believing of the U.S. at this point, as they've been burned by the same tactic. I guess the thing is, this is coming for people or countries who we would consider to be ostensibly allies, or at the very least, vassals. I wouldn't necessarily put Mexico in that bunch, but I would definitely put Canada in that group, and I would definitely put Europe in that group. It is astonishing to see what he is doing. And beyond the sanction stuff, let's be very clear. Sanctions are a tax. and it's a tax on us. The notion that you are going to hit Canada with a 25% tariff on goods, or for that matter, Mexico, and they are not going to respond in kind. And even if you want to go with this idea that the US economy is much larger, and so it will hurt them more, let's be very clear. It's Americans who are paying the cost of those sanctions or those tariffs. It's Americans that end up paying more money. Meaning, even if, as an American, you go and buy a product, the product was coming from Canada, the product was coming from Mexico. Let's say the product was cheaper from Canada or from Mexico. You've now added a 25% tariff on that product, which means that person is paying 25% more, because it's not like the company is going to eat the cost. The company is going to pass the cost on to the consumer. Fair enough. But that means that that American, by definition, is now paying more for that particular product, even if that American buys an American product because the Canadian product was higher. If indeed at one point the Canadian product was cheaper, then that American is now paying more for a particular product. Same thing is true with China. Same thing is true with this other stuff. It will hit us. It will hit us. It is nonsense to believe that it won't, especially if you get all of these countries who he's doing this to passing reciprocal sanctions on the US simultaneously. Now, Europe doesn't have a backbone, so who knows if they're willing to do that. Trudeau has come out and has immediately also put on sanctions. And just to back up a little bit. So right here, and I guess there are two stories with this. There's that, meaning the sanction war. We can step into that a little bit later. The other wild story that is bubbling up has to do with USAID. It has to do with USAID. I am fascinated by this because, people like me who will point out we're overthrowing governments, we're initiating coups, we're like literally using the National Endowment for Democracy, USAID, we're using these things to affect geopolitical objectives. And we're doing this, if you look at Romania, look at Slovakia, look at Ukraine, look at all of these places. We effectively spent billions to overthrow governments, and that money was funneled through things like the National Endowment for Democracy or USAID. So over the weekend, Elon Musk apparently, or people working for Elon Musk, was trying to get their hands on the files of USAID. They wanted to have an audit of USAID. Now, you can imagine that that is probably some pretty hairy stuff in those files, considering what USAID has been doing around the world, especially on the issue of Ukraine. And they did not want to allow those files to go into the hands of Musk's, the accountability thing, or whatever the thing Elon Musk is effectively running. And it got to the point where they was like, look, we will call the cops to get access to this information if you don't stand aside. And so those people were apparently put on leave, and apparently they got their hands on the files. This is RFK giving a great breakdown of how USAID is used around the world, meaning don't let the name fool you. Don't let the name fool you. It's like, leave no child behind. Okay, is it really doing that? Or is it just named that for propagandistic reasons? It's the latter. This is RFK giving an explanation of how USAID functions. And by the way, he is correct.
2014, there are riots it's called the Maidan Rebellion in Ukraine, which we're not told that we are financing those riots. The newspapers never told us, our government never told us. USAID, which is a CIA front, put $5 billion into funding those riots. Those riots lead to a coup d'etat against the first democratically elected government of the Ukraine. It was a government that refused to choose sides and to say, we're going to be on the side of the West. So we wanted them out. A month before that government is overthrown, Victoria Nuland, who's the part of the centerpiece of the Econ ideology and who is now a high-level official in the State Department, has a secret call with the U.S. ambassador, which is tape recorded and is now public, which anybody can go and look up, where she is picking the new cabinet for the Ukraine, which is which is a U.S. Western cabinet. So they're picking the new government a month before the old government is overthrown.
Is that how democracy? Is that democracy?
This is astonishing. That is astonishing. Like, look, I've told you before, when the war and everything else started, I felt like I was going through like a fantasy land. The things that media was repeating, even the things that quote unquote lefty media was repeating, was so off the reservation in regards to the reality of events. Meaning, what was real, how that stuff actually happened in practice, was completely lost. The context was completely dropped. And they went with this fantasy that Putin was trying to take over all of Europe, that it was unprovoked. I mean, just nonsense. And as I was going through and I was repeat, like, this is how these things happen. This was a series of events. It didn't just come out of a vacuum. It didn't come out the blue. It was understood that all of these things were red lines, and we pushed and pushed and pushed. I would show the William Burns memo, go back to 2008 at the Bucharest summit. I would show all of that stuff. But again, you're screaming in the vacuum. Media drops all context. And not just drops all context. They effectively push propaganda in order to push the government's line on this issue. And then you get a group that comes in that is very skeptical of these regime change wars in regards to what they kind of force and push the US into. And keep in mind, the same lunatics that were pushing these regime change wars and getting all of these people killed in these other countries are the same batch of lunatics that wanted to take Donald Trump out of office. Let's be very clear. So whether it's in Hungary, whether it's in Slovakia, whether it's in many of these countries, him putting a knife in USAID, on some level, it hits home with Trump. It's just astonishing. The man himself, Mark Sleboda, international relations and security analyst. How you doing today, Mark? You doing okay?
Tomorrow, I'm alive. How are you? Thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Well, I am also alive, as far as I know, Mark. And I'm always glad to have you in. I guess I have to start at the apartment complex bombing. What is going on with that? I'm just seeing that this morning. What happened? I mean, are they expecting... Like I said, I just saw the story this morning. They were saying at least one person's killed in a blast at Elite Elye Perusa residential complex. What are they thinking? This is a terrorist assault?
Yeah. Okay. So this is something that has happened hundreds and hundreds of times over in this conflict. It was a targeted assassination by method of a bombing, which by definition makes it a terrorist attack because it was meant to target one particular individual, but obviously it at least injured other people as well, and was obviously meant as explosion like this as a demonstration meant to instill political fear. The intended target of it was a native of the Donbass, of what had been Eastern Ukraine, Armen Sarkisyan, who was the founder of the Arbat Battalion, one of the Donbass battalions that has fought against the Kiev regime since the West-backed Maidan Putsch in 2014, and later became part of Russian forces. Now, Sarkisyan has not been, active as a commander of the Arbat in some time. He retired from the conflict years ago because this is more than a decade conflict for many people on both sides. But he is just one of hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of East Ukrainian or former East Ukrainian, they now identify as Russian, leaders, political leaders, activists, battalion leaders, figures at all levels of society that the Kiev regime considers traitors to their Westpac Butcher regime. And to their nation of what Ukraine is and should be. And of course, Sarkisyan was on the Mirotvorets kill list, the Kiev regime's official, unofficial kill list curated by the Interior Ministry of Ukraine.
Wow. So, oh, there you are. Oh, okay. I wasn't sure. I'm sorry. I thought you were continuing with I thought you had more to say with that.
The founder was killed. I mean, Sarkisyan was killed. He was initially reported as alive. He was, in critical condition, receiving treatment. Evidently, his leg had been blown off, but then he died in care. And there are 3 other people in what I understand is very serious injury. And this was a residential complex, a rather nice place. And they went off in the elevator lobby. So we don't know who the 3 other people are, but it's very likely that they are residents of the building. And again, this is just something that has happened hundreds and hundreds of times over. It is barely reported in the Western media. And when it is reported, it's reported with they deserved it because they were collaborators kind of air, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that's
the way
this is always reported when these former East Ukrainians are killed by the Kiev regime because they collaborated with the enemy.
That's astonishing. Yeah, that's astonishing. And you're right. That is the way it's reported in Western media, anyway, when they mention it. I want to get to Zelensky for a bit, or let's say the Trump administration. So it seems that the Trump administration has started to push Zelensky to get into elections, effectively saying, hey, maybe you need to hold an election because that's what democracies actually do. And we keep saying that Ukraine is a democracy, which is kind of laughable at this point, but whatever. We've had elections during wars. I mean, we had an election during the Civil War. So what is your excuse for why you can't necessarily have an election? Now, I would imagine, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, if the U.S., basically its primary funder is telling it, go have an election, on some level, he has to go have an election, correct? Well, you don't buy it.
We will see. We will see how things develop. I would consider this a positive data point, right? But we have heard rumors of the U.S. forcing Kiev regime to hold, Zelensky to hold elections multiple times over years now. Now that has been under Biden, so it's a different story. First of all, let me say, the salient, point of this issue is that Zelensky's term as quote unquote president of the Kiev regime has expired back last spring. And he has held presidential powers ever since by continuing emergency powers under emergency laws conditions, right? It just keeps extending his powers every 30 days, and then he renews them, declares that there's still a national emergency, and that is how he's continuing. The Russian government, with at least Putin's reading of the Ukrainian constitution, is that this is illegal, according particularly to some former Ukrainian Supreme Court decisions, constitutional court decisions. Now, the Western media largely just stays completely clear of this. They just don't address this issue whatsoever, right? It doesn't concern them, right?
It doesn't come
They
up.
don't really care. Ukraine has been christened a democracy, right? A freedom and all of that. And so that issue is never to be revisited. Now, my personal opinion is that Ukraine has not been a democracy since the Western-backed putsch that overthrew the last legitimate democratically elected government in Ukraine in 2014. And any, quote, elections that have been held that elected Zelensky, they did so with all the parties of Eastern Ukraine being successively lustrated, pogromed, and outright banned from existence. All parties representing the views of people of East Ukraine and all leftist parties in the country. Essentially, the only legitimate parties left are Maidan parties, right? That the course of the country since the Maidan, and nothing else. No other political force is allowed to challenge that, right? First, the Party of Regions was lustrated and driven out of existence, and then within a few years, when they had managed to reorganize as the opposition bloc, and they threatened to become the most popular party in the country, their leader was charged with treason, as numerous opposition party leaders were, and the party was then outright banned and dissolved as well. So, I mean, this happens, repeatedly. That Maidan course is not to be revisited democratically, whether the Ukrainian people would like to or not. Right. That's the end all be all. So I never considered any of the elections since 2014 in the country as legitimate. That being said, this is very interesting because Putin has been stressing this point that, even if we began negotiations and let's say we actually came to an agreement, which I find rather hard to believe, but that anything that Zelensky signed wouldn't be worth the paper that it was printed on for numerous reasons, right? Considering past history, but now especially since, a future Ukrainian administration could just say, he wasn't the legal president, right? Citing the very same reasons that Putin did. And therefore, we don't have to even pretend to pay attention to whatever we agreed to in this. And this is the most interesting point because the U.S. government, either under the Biden administration or up till now, we haven't heard it out of the Trump clique. Now the administration, we haven't heard them bring up this, right? Not openly like this, and this means that they're listening to what Russia is saying. That's fascinating. Right? Russia is saying this. We don't know whether Russia is saying this direct to them. There's a question of how much actual discussion is going on. Trump has said outright multiple times that we are in talks with the Russians. The Russians, meanwhile, say there is no high-level talks between the U.S. and Russia at all. Right. And we just had, a senior Russian diplomat stress that again over the last few days. So they've said anything that is happening is happening at the embassy level. And there's still not a Russian ambassador in the United States because the U.S. refuses to go about the process of approving the new one, including now under Trump. Now, we can hope that will change, but it hasn't so far. There's a question, but certainly they're talking at each other through the public, through the media, through social media. There is definitely at the least an exchange of views. And now for the first time, this is an indication that they're listening. It also means one further thing, right? It means that the Trump administration, that Trump wants Zelensky gone.
Yes.
Right. Automatically, because there's no question on anyone's mind. No one has any real question that if elections, quote unquote, were held in Ukraine and they were under any modicum affair, if you put a blind, mute, and deaf donkey on the ballot next to Zelensky, the blind, mute, and deaf donkey would win the election. Right. I mean, that's the condition.
And the landslide. Yep.
That's how loved Zelensky is in Ukraine right now. And we've heard people refer to him, including Tucker Carlson recently, among others. And we know that Tucker Carlson, he's not official part of the Trump administration, but he's definitely in the same vein and has influence on them, and he's outright correctly, but although not mentioning all the reasons why, just referring to this expiration of his office, but referred to Zelensky as a dictator. He's a tin pot Banderite fascist dictator. I mean, that's what he rules over. So this is interesting. This is the Trump administration saying, yeah, we don't like Zelensky. We never liked him. He was always friendly with our Democratic opposition. And he was, his administration was ultimately involved in trying to prevent me from running again. Maybe not they might have been involved in his impeachment attempt in the United States as well. But they're also it may be more than just personal like that, right? But for Donald Trump, I think that's probably the end all be all. That is personal. But beyond that, there may be a recognition also that he is simply an absolute obstacle to talks. I mean, we still, Simon Schuster is still referring to him, according to his own officials, as delusional, right? I mean, that happened back in the autumn of 2023, but
Time Magazine article,
report, again, they described him this way. So they consider that he is just living in his own reality, the literally the emperor with no clothes, covered in blood. And there's a recognition that if there is any Kiev regime to be saved, right, which that means that Donald Trump negotiations are going to be required to save it, backed by Donald Trump, which is why I hope that negotiations don't succeed at all, because I don't want this regime to continue in any way, shape, or form. And unfortunately, any elections, quote unquote, head by this regime, whether Zelensky wins or not, and I presume he will not, by the rules of this election that outlaws all the political opposition of East Ukraine and all leftist opposition in the country, that still means we're just going to get another Maidan SOB in there. Maybe Poroshenko comes back, maybe Zaluzhny, maybe Budanov, who knows, some crazy Banderite or someone who is sympathetic to them and will ultimately become one himself, just like Poroshenko and Zelensky both eventually did, right? Because that's the nature of the regime. So I really hope, first of all, I see no reason why any type of peace negotiation brokered by the U.S. will succeed. All right, the Kiev regime is against it. The Europeans are against it, right? The ultra nationalists, the Banderite fascists, who still are the core of the Kiev regime's military forces that are capable and willing to fight. All the security services, their quote unquote political parties, everything, they're run through it, and they will not accept a peace settlement, right? They just won't. They will fight and to the death of every last Ukrainian, right? Not only including themselves. If they can push someone out in front first, they most likely will. But I believe they would fight to that as well. Maybe not Zelensky himself. I mean, he's obviously not a fighter. He would flee to Brooklyn or Miami or wherever, right? But I don't see the U.S. presenting any deal that the Russians would accept at this point. And I don't see how any U.S. president, even Trump, no matter what he thinks of Zelensky and Ukraine, could accept Russian terms, because they would be surrender terms, right? Because Russia rightly believes they have won this conflict, right? I mean, it's not it's delivered. It's not signed, sealed, and delivered yet, right? But there is no battlefield way, right? Current trends continuing, and there's no real reason to believe that they could be altered, right? Other than fantastical hopium beliefs that after 3 years of 24,000 plus sanctions, the next month will be the one that breaks the back, and it will all come crumbling down finally. I mean, that's the only belief that the fantasists who still believe or want to believe, right, in a Kiev regime victory, or at least a non-total defeat that they can count on. That's it. And I think they're completely wrong. And I live here, so I do see a bit of how the economy is functioning on a daily basis, and almost nothing that is printed in the Western media is true, right? It's just completely false. There is moderate inflation, which again, all Western countries are suffering to one degree or another now, and have for years, and that alone, which is already being tamed by central bank measures, is just it is a complete hopium fantasy to believe that this is some type of fatal Achilles heel wound or something like that. It's just complete nonsense. So I just don't, even with all of this, I still don't see any peace negotiations succeeding, because Russia has too much to gain and too much to lose by peace negotiations. No matter what, forget Zelensky never agreeing to this, and political turmoil in Ukraine, and all of the European elite majors, at least in the UK and France and Germany, lining up and saying, we'll continue, we'll double down, we need to spend more. Patriot missiles now being sent from Israel to Ukraine, with the U.S. as a quick intermediary, which quite obviously Trump did not choose to. At least, this was begun under the Biden administration.
Right.
But you have to believe that Trump now would have the ability, if he so chose, to stop that. And Macron is all ready to send the Mirage 2000, which is kind of a joke of an aircraft, to be perfectly honest, right? And not quite as bad as the F-35, but they're getting rid of them, and they're getting rid of them by giving them to Ukraine, right? They were already mothballed, right? But now they're going to send them to Ukraine. They'll be almost as effective as the F-16s have been for Ukraine, which is, crickets chirping. But that being said, there's one of the Scandinavian countries just signed off on another 1.2 billion of military aid over the last week. All signs are that the Europeans are not ready to throw in the towel yet, right? No one is convinced. No one in Kiev is convinced. And there still is a lot of belief in the U.S. Congress, right? In the proxy war in Ukraine. Now,
it doesn't work that way here.
Donald Trump steamroll his way over that? I don't know. Let's take a look ultimately at what happens. The nominations of RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard haven't gone through yet, right?
Not yet.
Not yet.
And to be honest, both of those are going to be very close. And that is, but see, that has more to do than Trump, though. RFK, Tulsi Gabbard are uniquely hated by Democrats because they used to be Democrats.
Well, so is Trump uniquely hated by Democrats as a whole,
yeah,
as well as by a number of neocon Republicans, right?
That is true.
And
that is true.
For the nomination of Hegseth, if I believe correctly, right, a figure whom I think you'll agree is at least less controversial with Republicans, other Republicans, than RFK Jr. or certainly Tulsi Gabbard. It required J.D. Vance as the vice president to come to the floor to vote to break the tie and get Hegseth through,
Mhm.
which tells me right away that there's a lot more opposition. The entire pharmaceutical industry and all of the politicians it owns, including, as RFK Jr. pointed out, Bernie Sanders,
Including Bernie Sanders.
including Bernie Sanders.
Bernie Sanders.
Nice burn there by RFK Jr., by the way. No. If you saw that video,
I did see it, yeah. Because it's funny. I mean, Sanders is so full of it. He's so full of it. I know this is a segue, but it's like, dude, you know, when they're having these congressional hearings, they already know what they're going to say. They already know what they're going to do. They know what they're going to vote. The stuff is just scripted.
It's performative.
Yeah, it's pure performative. And so it's like, you know, the idea that you're standing behind Joe Biden as the most progressive president since FDR, but RFK is your issue.
Yeah.
It's like, get out of here. Just get out of here.
And Tulsi Gabbard has an even less chance of being approved. And I saw, you know, I'm not going to say I saw the entire thing, but I very assiduously watched clips from Tulsi Gabbard's nomination.
She's fantastic.
And she is so formidable. She is so formidable. And that's why they can never let her approval go.
You know,
through.
one of the wild pieces in that clip that blew me away, and blew me away is not the right word for it. It's shocking because it brings into alignment what is U.S. policy for real, not what they say, not the love and light, not we believe in democracies and rainbows, not that, like bare bones. And the guy pointed out, he says, hey, it sounds like you were saying similar things that Putin was saying, and sometimes even Iran. And Tulsi pointed out, like, dude, we are supporting terrorists in these governments. I fought for this country. I was literally in Iraq fighting for this country. And now you've put in the people in power in Syria, or we're backing the exact same people that I effectively was fighting. He says, yeah, this is disgusting. How on earth can you know?
Putin says that. So even if it's true, it's bad.
Exactly. It was that part, right? And he was like, he says, yeah, but, you know, Russia said it. And it's like, dude, did you just hear what I said to you? Like, I literally pointed out to you that we are literally backing terrorists. And his response is, yeah, but why did you say it?
Yeah, I mean, she said, you know, I've been called Putin's puppet. I've been called Assad's puppet. I've been called Trump's puppet. At the end of the day, I'm paraphrasing her, you know, your real problem is that I'm not your puppet.
Pretty much. It's that. And for Democrats, her going after Hillary Clinton and all of this, you know, the warmongers, as she calls them, the woke warmongers. Yeah, they take issue with that stuff. And Democrats predominantly take issue with that stuff.
And
more Republicans.
Personal, emotional level.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, first of all, on an analytic level, I can't see how Tulsi Gabbard could ever be approved. Right. I just don't believe it will happen. I mean, we can talk recess appointment, you know, whether that would be, you know, how useful that would be to Trump, so forth. But on a simple emotional, personal level, I do not want to see Tulsi Gabbard approved.
Really?
Because then I might want, it might force me to have some hope. And hope is the death of analysis.
Gotta kill my hope.
We talked about this. We've talked about this before. And let me just say that as a journalist, hope is entirely acceptable. In fact, I mean, there's a whole, you know, vein of you know, political journalism, right? Activist journalism, whatever you want to call it. So that is entirely fine and acceptable, and in some cases even laudable, right? We need that, right? But as an analyst, and I primarily consider myself an analyst, not a journalist, hope is the death of analysis, right? Hope is the death of that cold-blooded objectivity that is needed to assess things. So that's why, because every time I see Tulsi Gabbard take the floor against the entire Senate and intelligence establishment, I start to feel emotionally stirred. And
I love it. Oh, man, I love it. I love it. You have no idea. I love it. And, you know, going to that, just to go back for a moment, we were talking about the election in regards to Zelensky. You know, there was an article, there was a report that came out, I believe this was several weeks ago, that was effectively saying that there were behind the scenes meetings, or at the very least communications with Zelensky to say, hey, if you don't run for office, if you don't push in a political sense, we won't go after you. If you do, however, we may prosecute you and effectively go after you for legal consequences. Okay, fast forward. A few days ago, an article came out that effectively pointed out that Zelensky could be prosecuted for blowing up Nord Stream.
That was laid out long ago. If you'll remember, we talked about it when the Washington Post suddenly started dropping Zelensky's name. Zelensky wasn't involved at all, but Zelensky was, right? You know, like this whole cockamamie, you know, rando Ukrainians in the SS Minnow, you know, were the ones who blew up this whole CIA denial cover story, right? Even then, though, there was these little traps laid for Zelensky in all of this, right? Again, though, I have to say now, the conditions have changed because the Biden administration is no longer in charge, and there is no guarantee that the Trump administration would use those levers against Zelensky. And it would be very hard for the Germans or someone to do that on their own. They would be completely directionless in that regard. So that's not as much of a potential obstacle, right, or threat or blackmail as it might have once been. And case in point is the whole propaganda hoax of North Korean soldiers fighting in the special military operation for Russia in the Kursk region, right? The Kiev regime picked it up, and then like almost 2 months later, finally the Western governments were like, yeah, they're there. Yeah, sure they are. And then the Western media is like, yes, they're there, right? You know, and there was zero criticality. There was no analysis. There was never any proof involved. The two soldiers from Yakut that were not Yakut, where was it? Somewhere
one of the other,
in Siberia that were caught, and you know, their military documents that identify them as being from East Siberia are obviously fake. You know, never mind that they don't even look North Korean in the slightest, right? They must be North Korean, right? And then the Western media is like, okay, yeah, sure, right? There was one single line in all of the Western media I saw that questioned this whole North Korea propaganda hoax, North Korean fighting in the SMO propaganda hoax. And that was a line in BBC. And it wasn't even their own words. They simply quoted from a Kiev regime soldier fighting in the Kursk region who said that, yes, it can be very hard to find a North Korean soldier at night in the dark of the Kursk forests, especially when they're not there. And BBC didn't comment it at all. They didn't say, what does that say? They just left it out there at the very end of the story. But that was the only line that you know, they snuck that by the editors or something because it came from a Ukrainian. But now that story's all gone because the New York Times tells us, oh, the North Korean soldiers have been defeated and Kim Jong-un pulled them all out. They're all gone from the front line, and that's it. We'll never hear from them again, right? I mean, which is to say, we can't trust that Trump will carry through on this hoax the way the Biden administration did, and then the truth will come out and everyone will have eggs on their faces, right, for this whole propaganda bit. So, you know, they gotta shoo the North Koreans away from the spotlight completely now. That whole story, you're never going to hear North Korean soldiers. Now, North Korean equipment, yes, there is actual evidence, right, that Russia is using some North Korean artillery shells, some howitzers, possibly some missiles. I haven't seen any direct evidence of that, but it's certainly plausible, right? There's no question, which I certainly don't care. Every single NATO country and NATO allies like Japan and Israel and South Korea have supplied weapons to the Kiev regime. Why shouldn't Russia, take some supplies from North Korea, right? That's just absurd.
Yeah, I never understood this double standard.
Troops fighting never made any sense. There's zero military operability. They just signed a treaty. They've got no experience working together. They would just be a hindrance. They're not needed. Russia has all the manpower it needs for the moment, right? And that's just it was always obviously a just propaganda, just blatant, not misinformation, but active disinformation.
Yeah.
Right. And the fact that the whole Western media went along with it without once questioning it or examining any evidence or anything, the fact that they just went along it is such a condemnation of them. I mean, I remember when I started, as a young man to doubt the Western media with the whole back to the Iraq war stories. But I mean, all of that was nowhere near the Orwellian level that the entire Western mainstream media is today.
I've never seen anything like it. And like I've told my audience, I felt like I was in a fantasy land when this conflict first started. And it was like the reporting here, they would drop all context. It would be stuff like where Vladimir Putin wants to take over all of Europe with 150,000 troops.
Shovels running out, using refrigerator chips, untrained,
running out of missiles,
rubble, all of these lies from the very beginning. But we're the propagandists, not you, right?
It's outrageous.
Get out of here. I will take our record talking together over anyone and everyone in the Western media over the last 3 years. Let's side that up point by point. And I mean, we'll be so far miles ahead of them in facts and, predicting what is happening both militarily and politically that, of course, that will never happen. So,
yeah, we've been far more right. I mean, like they've been laughably wrong all the way through. I mean, the idea that they were making this argument that North Korean soldiers would burn their faces just before they died.
They would burn their as they were dying. They would all burn their faces, or they would burn each other's faces, so they couldn't properly be identified as North Korean.
It's so outrageous. It's like, but it's a North Korean government. It's a dictatorship. It's a totalitarian state. So when he tells you to burn your face on your deathbed, you burn your face on your deathbed. It's like, okay, this is outlandish. Now, to be fair, 90% of the media, this was one of the stats that came out, I believe this was last week, 90% of the media in Ukraine was being paid for by the U.S. State Department.
And the funny thing about that is, who does the Western media always refer to?
The Ukrainian
media, right? It's all one. And then the politicians, even those that get intelligence briefs, still rely primarily, right? And not all of them get useful intelligence briefs. And we know how politicized U.S. intelligence has been. We don't know exactly what they're saying now, but we know how politicized and incorrect it has been. Mm-hmm. But the politicians are still reading and largely going by the narrative of the media, right? So you see that this is all a propaganda, unreality, negative feedback loop, with the U.S.'s own propaganda, generated, pumped through Ukraine, pumping back through, and informing politicians to make even worse foreign policy decisions, right? On this whole affair. It is a disreality complex. It is truly, I mean, Orwell, he didn't have the half of it. He didn't have the half of it.
Yeah, it was insane. Like I said, I've never seen anything like it. Let me ask you this. So Zelensky recently was given an interview, and I guess there are a few things. One, when Donald Trump pointed out Zelensky needs to go into elections, well, apparently Zelensky freaked out a little bit, effectively pointed out, Ukraine needs a seat at the table for any negotiations that take place. But he also pointed out, he says there's $100 billion of U.S. taxpayer money that seems to have disappeared. He said, I don't know where all of this money is. Now, I've pointed out before, if you send $280 billion, even if you lose $1 billion, that is going to be difficult to find, right? I mean, that's so much money that you're sending in weapons, money, intelligence, etc. That losing a few billion, even though it's a huge amount of money, may not necessarily be the easiest thing to kind of track and get your hands on. So, I mean, but that's a lot of money. $100 billion is an astonishing amount of money. And Zelensky has said something like this once before, that like he only got half of the money or half of what the US said that they were going to give him. What do we know about this? I mean, this is just corruption, right? Where money is just falling through a floor somewhere.
Okay, so a lot of it is actually, I mean, a lot of it when politicians say things like money that's intended for Ukraine. First of all, there's a certain above board level of all of it, right? Because a lot of that was so simply actually earmarked as, when it was presented as aid for Ukraine, as investment in the US military industrial complex, and that would aid Ukraine. I mean, so when a lot of it is evoked like that, I mean, it was never actually intended to go to Ukraine. I mean, it was billed that way, but even on paper, right, official paper, it was supposed to be invested in the United States. Right?
I see.
That's some of it, right? Now, obviously, we know that there is a high degree of corruption built into the U.S. military and intelligence complex, right? I mean, it siphons money away from everything, right? Redirects it for its own purposes. There has been a lot, I believe, provided to Ukraine that has been off the books, right?
Which they may find an investigation, by the way.
Maybe they'll find some of it. Do I ever believe they'll find any of it? Some of it has been redirected to other conflicts and, other countries. There's no question. But yes, corruption is built into the U.S. military industrial complex, and it's simply considered the norm, right? It's accepted, right? It's corruption when other countries do it, but when the U.S. does it, it's perfectly normal and legal because it's the U.S. It's not questioned. So how much actually ended up, you can understand why a lot of Kiev regime officials would be upset by that. If it's how much of it is true, I can't say, because that's less for them to steal, right? What the smaller percentage that then goes on to their forces fighting, right? But I mean, it's kind of really ridiculous. Kettle black, pot calling black, and trying to point fingers at the U.S. at this point is really, it just smacks of desperation. It really does. Yes, it's to some degree, it's probably true. To some degree, it's probably true, but it's just desperation at this point. I don't really, at this point, I don't really think it's that salient. I mean, it's all crooked. It's all corrupt on both sides. I matter more what's happening on the battlefield.
Yeah, it's
a whole idea that either in the U.S. or in the Kiev regime in Ukraine that there's going to be any transparency or accountability is laughable. So.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of goes to what Trump said about Joe Biden one day. He said, all of these people that Joe Biden pardoned, going all the way back since the beginning of the Ukraine war. He says, in the end, it might have been, how did he say it? I'm paraphrasing, but he should have pardoned himself. Effectively saying that Joe Biden might have been doing something illegal or something he didn't have any business doing.
Let's have a moment of honesty here, because while I would enjoy seeing quite a few U.S. officials from the blob, from USAID and other agencies, being sent to trial and being locked up, I would enjoy that. But let us have a moment of honesty with ourselves that the entire U.S. Legal and justice system has been politicized and weaponized. And now, whenever a new administration comes in, we just see the process of lawfare, where they utilize the law selectively as a weapon against their political opponents. That has become the norm whenever there's a change in power now in Washington, right? That is, it happened against Trump. Now Trump is reversing it around, and he's sure to escalate it up to biblical proportions against his opponents. And I won't mind, right? I'm not, but that's not to say that it's in its totality actually law or justice. It's a political weapon at this point.
No, I agree with you. To a certain extent. I mean, it depends, right? Like, if you're getting rid of 51 intelligence officials and you're saying, okay, I'm removing your security clearances. And like one of the leaked documents that recently came out showed that behind the scenes, they were in communication saying, this is going to provide cover for Joe Biden during the debate. And so they effectively use their security clearance to lie in this kind of mass psyop to the American public. I have zero issue with them taking it.
I mean, I don't either. I mean, I'm happy to see the American political establishment eat itself alive, as it should. And whatever games Trump is playing with foreign policy, and there is a lot of interesting games and a lot of mafia tactics, at Panama and Colombia and attempted at other countries going on. He's going to war with the deep state. I mean, there are huge purges, right? USAID. I mean, they're openly talking about shutting it down.
That's what I wanted to hit with you before you go. Also, the USAID thing has been fascinating to me.
USAID is code for Regime Change Op Central, right? I mean, that's what it is.
Right there.
It's not the only player in that, but it is the big player. Right.
National Endowment for Democracy is another one. I mean, I've never seen a situation where they've put a circle around the fact that we have been knocking over governments using like funneling money through these organizations in order to pull that off. RFK just gave this sit down with Tucker Carlson where he brought up how USAID was used to overthrow the government of Ukraine in 2014. And I'm sitting there like, why?
Yeah. There has been open evidence of U.S. aid involved in this, in regime change attempts in Cuba and elsewhere, covered in the Western media for years now. Just no one cared.
Yeah,
no one, and the reason is primarily because it's his opponents. Do you believe that Trump is against using U.S. intelligence organs to overthrow other governments? No, it's that this was weaponized in part against him. Right. That's why he's against it. Right. If he organizes something once again to try to overthrow the government of Venezuela, that's fine. Right. That's why I say that this is politicized and weaponized. And I'm happy to see any part of the blob eat any other part of the blob alive. But let's just not fall into the projection belief that Trump is a good guy, right?
Oh, dude, we're well beyond. Yeah, we're well beyond the pale.
Genocide gone now, right? He officially earns that moniker.
Yeah, we're well beyond the pale on that one. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, Trump tried to use USAID to overthrow the government of Venezuela. Like that wasn't, during his own term.
Wasn't tried in that. Yeah. So what I'm fascinated. He's going after political. He's purging the Treasury, the Defense Department, the State Department. He is firing people left and right. Anyone whom he made a list over all these years of anyone who ever said or did anything against him, and they're all gone. I mean, the blob is going to. There is going to be an enormous influx of professors, right, in poli-sci and other, economics and other things at U.S. universities, which is usually where these officials go, when they're off in a political cycle, or, alternatively to the business community, though that's more Republican territory than for the Democrat bureaucratic officials, right, in the blob. But I mean, we're grab the popcorn. This is Trump's real war. This is the war that Trump wants to fight, even more than a war with China. It's a war against the blob that waged war on him since, he was running for office the first time. Mm-hmm. This is payback. This is mafia, blood on the walls, right? A political warfare going on in DC. This is
I've never seen anything like it. Not where the guy gets in office and decides they tried to destroy me and I'm going to return the favor. And
the last time this happened, I will shattered CIA. I will scatter the CIA to the winds, right, in 1,000 pieces. and they killed him, right? Well, there have been 2 assassination attempts, at least thus far, on Trump. We'll see how much further he gets with this before someone decides that some crazy lone wolf person is going to.
How successful do you think he's going to be with this? I'm curious. I mean, like I'm trying to separate these two into 2 different sections.
Yeah.
The side that's okay, this is legit. You know, you're trying to affect an agenda that all of these people are effectively going to be against you, especially in foreign policy sense. And then there's the other side of these are just political grudges, political grinds, axes to grind. I'm taking off axes to grind for a moment because I'm never going to be okay with that.
Yeah.
From the standpoint of I want to affect an agenda. In order for me to affect this agenda, I need certain people in various spots as opposed to people backstabbing me.
You're way too idealistic there, right there. I mean, you're way too principled and idealistic for DC right there. I mean, it's always about political axes to grind. And you should be happy when the axe falls and the head that is beheaded benefits you in any way possible. You should be more cynical about that in that regard.
Yeah.
Do I think he's going to be successful? I will say I don't know because I'm 20 years outside of the US and have never been in the Beltway, right? I've never been a part of K Street, and other things. But I will say that he's obviously much better organized and there's a plan this time. There are other people. It's just not him and former General Ryan Flynn going up against the deep state, right? I mean, he's got a whole apparatus. There's a plan. It was being enacted from minute 1, right? I mean, as soon as he was inaugurated, there were people going, go, 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 right? And the executive orders being repealed and, the stop work orders and the firings and the purgings, right? And the suspensions. It's been going on, like a tidal. In fact, the tidal wave is still building. Actually, right? So there's people, there is an apparatus, there is a plan behind it this time, right? I mean, he was the literal Santa Claus taking names, right? He's got a naughty list, right? That you were naughty against me. That is, I mean, enormous. And he's going through it, right? Checking it twice. And he's going to get all those naughty little boys and girls in the Beltway, inside and outside of it, right? Ultimately, he's going up against so much. It is so huge. It is so powerful. It has been in motion for so long. We just over the weekend, right before the weekend, we heard Mark Rubio, right, himself a dyed in the wool neocon. Right. Get in an interview with Megyn Kelly, just come out and say outright, the unipolar moment is over. Yep. We need to return to the policy of diplomacy, which the U.S. abandoned under previous administrations. Diplomacy was seen because we are morally and systemically superior, under the supremacist messianic ideology of exceptionalism, that we don't talk to our enemies. We don't need to talk to them, right? It would sully us to talk to them. We only talk when you kowtow to us, when you bandwagon to us. The diplomacy was not something that you do with your adversaries, right? I mean, that was why even the New York Times has now said that Antony Blinken was a secretary of war, right? I said it. I said it on this show. How many times now? Even the New York Times agrees with me that under Blinken, the top diplomat of the country, the State Department became a Department of War, right? They just didn't do diplomacy. Rubio says we need to do diplomacy with the other great powers now. That alone is enormous, right? Astonishing. It is a watershed narrative change. Now, the Western media is still largely ignoring it because they don't know how to process that. They're still drunk on the unipolar moment, right? They're obviously starting to feel the pangs of hangover, right? But they're still drunk on it, right? And we're already really a decade past it at this point, certainly past its, high water mark. But that admission alone, and it was Mark Rubio who said those words.
Of all
right?
people. Yeah.
I mean, it has I still am too cynical to believe that he's actually undergone a Damascene conversion, right? And recognized reality. I think he's playing his part for his political future,
He's doing
right?
his job,
But
right.
even those things have a way of internalizing themselves, right? So there's so many interesting things happening, right? I've been laser focused on what's been happening on the battlefield in Ukraine and in
Yeah.
Kiev over the last few years, with an occasional nervous glance over towards Syria, right? I took my eye off that ball like everyone did, right? There's no question there. But now there's so much happening so fast in DC, and the battles there are obviously political,
Mhm.
not but there's blood on the walls in DC all the same. They're the real war, the real dynamic war. And that's not to say that any results of it, even if Trump won, would be good, because that would simply be abandoning what he sees as cost ineffective pursuit of hegemony and primacy.
Right.
What he wants is there's too many people out there in the alt media who are projecting themselves onto Trump, right? Their own beliefs, their own hopes onto Trump, right? Trump is not looking for a constructive place for the US to play in a multipolar world order. Trump, he's moving away from the pursuit of hegemony and primacy under conventional terms to old school imperialism, where he's entrenching down and saying everything in the Western Hemisphere is mine.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
And I'm still going to play around in Israel and elsewhere as well, right? Obviously he intends to, but he's entrenching down on what he believes is his. That's old school imperialism, right?
Yeah.
That's
Years of influence.
right. So
it's like Russia and China going to have theirs. This is ours.
Yeah. You can find benefit. You can exploit that as an opponent, but let's not pretend for a moment that is a beneficent or a good thing, right?
No,
It's
this is
just
weird.
a chaos bomb. It's
Yeah.
just chaos bomb. The chaos bomb is going off, and as I hope, it's going off on DC right now. It's going off on the transatlantic relationship. First was this thing with, Denmark is ours. You can either sell it to us or we're going to take it, right? That was the first one. But now the tariff war, Trump's tariff stick. Mexico, tariffs for you. Canada, tariffs for you. China, yeah, I see you over there laughing. Tariffs for you. Oh, EU, you want some? Bam, 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 tariff stick. I mean, Trump,
what do you think he's after with those? I got to be honest. This seems like the dumbest trade war that I've ever seen. And give me your take on that. What do you think he's trying to get? Like, I get the pressure.
He's said it openly before, right? He's talked about this. He talked about it all the way back in his first administration, right?
Mm-hmm.
He keeps talking about this American golden age, right? In Trump's mind, someone, whether it was something he read or someone, imprinted on him, he believes that the time period of the U.S. presidency of William McKinley was the economic golden age of the United States, when the U.S. was climbing to power among industrial nations to number one, largely not through globalization and free trade, but through the use of a really big tariff stick, right? And Trump has, for whatever reason, gravitated that this is the American geoeconomic and geopolitical solution rolled into one.
To what? I guess that's my like if you're talking to an economist, let's say Richard Wolff, he would say the empire is on decline, and all of these moves are ways of trying to slow the decay, or at the very least to try to find, like you said, this golden age. By using
He's trying to bring manufacturing back to the United States, right? Which is hopeless, right? It's hopeless. I mean, it's well beyond that, I think, at this point. I mean, at least in terms, of mass consumer items and stuff like that. And he is a business person in a political and geopolitical role. So he looks at the problem and the solutions through a completely different prism, and probably an incorrect. That's not to say that what was existing before worked. It didn't, right? But this also is not likely to work, and in upsetting the balance is likely to lead to even more catastrophe. But like I said, from over here, it's just pass the popcorn.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm
weird.
sorry.
It's bizarre.
He is in a full-scale tariff war with the entire his own Western allies.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And it's the tidal effects. We saw hints of it in his first administration, but there was a lot more obstacles from the Senate, from the intelligence. He's waging war against all those obstacles at home at the same time as he is going about his grand vision of being president, Donald McKinley. It's fascinating. Trying to understand what's going on in Trump's head is of course, I don't know, and I have to say that I don't know, but he's thrown enough obvious comments repeated enough times to be able to pick up, an occasional trace of where his thought process is going.
Yeah.
And it's pretty obvious, I think, in this case, that's where the thing is that he's managed to collect together a group of people whom he has either convinced or managed to direct them towards that endeavor, and they are at least committed to it.
They're falling in line. Yeah.
Right, yeah. There's a plan, there's a policy, there's a process. There is an apparatus going about the pursuit of this, and it is a new, hugely unorthodox, like a heresy, grand strategic vision for the U.S. Economic, political, geopolitical, social, right? There he's just throwing all the LGBTQ transsexual stuff out completely out the window, right? It's all gone.
I will say this.
He's attempting to completely change the United States, right? May remake it in his own vision, however distorted that is, and simply this may break America in the process.
I think it will be
the best result.
There will be some serious economic consequences. Like this notion that BRICS didn't come out of nowhere. Like BRICS didn't come out of a vacuum. It was policies that Trump is effectively doing now. And this was kind of like, okay, we're going to pass sanctions on the rest of the world, and the rest of the world feels some kind of way about these kind of unilateral sanctions, or America moralizing while being hypocrites at the same time. Okay, he has taken the mask off. Like, we're not allies, we're not friends, you're our vassals, and we will extract and colonize you every bit as much as you colonize all of these other places. It is astonishing. Like I said, I've never seen anything like it. So we will see how
the last time was, that time that he imagines was the golden age, when America wasn't even shy about, its imperial role, in the Western Hemisphere and around the world. So it's refreshing in a way. It's entertaining. Yeah. I mean, it is like watching if not an HBO production, then at least a Netflix one.
To give them a little bit of credit, I would say there's something. Oh man, I don't want this to come across sounding wrong. There's something good about a president winning an election and saying, I'm going to fulfill my campaign objectives. And in order to fill those objectives, even if I have to step on people's toes to do it, then I'm going to do it. The issue is that it's what he's doing. Like it's him and I have different priorities in regards to what I think is going to be right or correct. But it's more so like many of these other presidents that came in were just milquetoast. Like, it was like a placeholder. Joe Biden was just a placeholder. I mean, he could have been a dead body and would have effectively been as effective as he was in that office. Whereas, as you point out, Trump had a plan. He was far more organized. He was far more diligent. he decided to take on wars all across the globe. And I mean, political fights, even among countries that he considered to be allies. And some of these he's winning. I mean, Venezuela ends up taking back its people. Colombia ends up taking back its people. Panama apparently stopped working with China.
Yeah,
Denver,
I mean, it's just outright. Yeah.
Yeah.
That one belt, one road stuff, you're going to stop cooperating with the Chinese completely, or we're going to break your economic legs.
Yeah.
I mean, it's that outright, right? I mean, it's done exactly that way. And Panama,
they capitulate.
China doesn't have that type of geopolitical influence, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the Western Hemisphere. So it's, in my mind, it's trading one unworkable, aberrant geopolitical vision for the United States as hegemon for another aberrant, unworkable geopolitical vision of the United States as first among imperial great powers. But it is my hope is not that he will succeed, because I don't believe he ultimately he ever could, but that the chaos in the transition from one to the other and all the internal and external conflicts that will revolt from that will break the U.S. grip on the world such as it is now in the process. That's the chaos bomb. The chaos bomb right now is going off in some of the best possible places.
Yeah, I'll let you go, Mark, but it would have to, by definition, right? I mean, on the positive side, him looking at this as spheres of influence would mean he cares about other big countries or other powers. So Russia, China, these will be countries to negotiate with. Hell, maybe even Iran. Europe, not so much.
No, Europe is not a great power. They're just a vassal to the United States, and they need to get in line. Yeah. That's, I mean, there's this whole, the whole talk right now is that the fear, the very real fear in Kiev and in Brussels and in London and Berlin and elsewhere, that that Trump could come to a deal with Russia over Ukraine and never involve the Europeans or the Kiev regime in Ukraine at all, and just say, this is what we've agreed to, you got to accept it, right? I mean, that fear is, I don't know how real that is, but that fear is gripping Kiev and Brussels and London right now, right?
Would you have any doubt that he would deliver this kind of fait accompli? I mean, as you pointed out, part of the reason he wants to get rid of Zelensky, I would imagine, is because, he's a stone in the process. He wants to get rid of him.
Yeah, he's a stone in the process. He doesn't like Zelensky. He doesn't like the regime there. And he just doesn't give a flying F about Ukraine. It's not on his priority list. That said, he still can't hand it to Putin on a silver platter. So we'll see. We'll see what comes out of it. Yep.
Mark Sleboda, international relations security analyst. You can follow Mark on Twitter at Mark Sleboda1. You can find him on his YouTube channel at Realpolitik with Mark Sleboda. And you can also find him on Facebook at facebook.com/Gramsci. Mark, man, always appreciate talking to you, my man. And you're right. We've been damn more right than any of these other creatures in the media. So shout out to you, my man. Have a good one, Mark.
Cheers.
All right. Yeah, man, he is a bull in a china shop, to put it mildly. Like I said, I have mixed feelings. Some of this stuff I agree with. Others, not so much. This notion that you're letting all of these random people out of prison. Some of these people were out there fighting cops. Some of these people were plotting overthrows, meaning a violent overthrow with guns in Virginia and everything. Okay, that's dicey to me. You getting rid of the 51 intelligence officials. And by the way, just to make that point clear, take a look at this. So this was a leaked document that came out. I believe this was Brennan, if I can find it. Yeah, so right here. Brennan comes out and effectively makes this point of saying, no, we never said that these were that this was Russian disinformation. We never said it. It's like, dude, are you really gonna play that role? Are you really gonna tell us that our perceptions of what you were saying, what you were communicating, and what you were trying to imply strongly, strenuously trying to imply was not true. Now, this guy, Brennan, worked for the CIA. At one point, he was the director. And as Pompeo pointed out, I lied, cheat, and stole for a living. Morally, these people are amoral, right? So lying is not necessarily something that all that much care about, especially if it's going and putting a knife in somebody who they don't particularly like, that person being Donald Trump. I think people need to really understand part of Trump's going to war with all of these sectors of the various economy or of the political class is because all of them try to destroy him. I mean, think about it in real terms. What do you think the Trump and Russia stuff came in? What do you think the Steele dossier being stovepiped into the FBI? Where do you think the Carter page and the spying on his campaign, and then all of the response to the spying on the campaign, the USAID being used to overthrow these other governments, Hungary, Slovakia, Ukraine, like all of these are governments, or at the very least, Hungary and Slovakia. Ideally, you would think that Donald Trump would dovetail with these governments, and the last thing he would want is for these governments to go belly up. Romania is another government that he most likely will be able to work with, providing Carl Gorgescu gets in office. They put a knife in Gorgescu by annulling the election, which is, again, outrageous and astonishing. The attempted overthrow of the Georgian government is another good example. I would wager to you, USAID was instrumental in all of it. That's kind of the point that I'm making. The USAID thing is not about, oh, we're just helping feed people. It's not. It's, we don't like that government, and we need to overthrow and get rid of that government. I'm saying that that same device of overthrowing governments and the people who were effectively using that device were the same people that were trying to get rid of Donald Trump. So you can imagine he feels some kind of way about this, considering they tried to effectively destroy him. 51 intelligence officials. Think back to when that took place. You had the debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. There was the start of an October or November surprise, whichever month the surprise typically comes. They're on the debate stage. Trump points out, this is a laptop from hell, that this is so corrupt, and it gets across that it's not about the porn, it's not about Hunter Biden showing his, measuring M&Ms on his penis. It's not about him banging porn stars or him banging hookers. It's not about him doing crack pipes and falling asleep in the bathtub with a crack pipe. It's not about that stuff. That stuff is salacious. That stuff is pretty debaucherous. And yes, he's a bit of a degenerate. But it's not that. It's the business relationships. It's the corruption that's built into that process, where it's clear as day that his family was using his name for influence peddling. Who the hell is giving Hunter Biden $80,000 a month when he knows nothing about oil and gas and he knows nothing about Ukraine? And when Joe Biden has to deal with this, he said, well, he's a smart guy. Okay, sure he is. Maybe, maybe not. But you being quote unquote smart doesn't necessarily mean you have proprietary knowledge about a particular thing that you are effectively being paid for. Well, the reality of it is he was being paid because of his last name was Biden. It was influence peddling. The same thing with, I'm sitting here with my father, and you either give me $20 million or me and my father are going to be mad at you forever. Okay, I don't care if Hunter Biden is mad at me. Why do I care? Why do I care? Why do I care if a crackhead is mad at me? If I am in a business, let's say some kind of investor business, well, I may have some feelings about your dad, who is president or who is VP. I may have some feelings about him being mad at me because that could adversely affect my business. That could adversely affect my ability to make money going forward in my business relationships. Meaning it's not Hunter, it's Biden. The issue is always Biden. It was clout chasing. It was political influence peddling. That's the point. Trump gets out there and makes that point clear, saying the laptop makes this very clear, makes it obvious. 51 intelligence officials come out and say, well, this is nonsense. This has the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. This is what they came out with. And so fervent were they with that they put New York Post in Twitter jail. None of the media would own up to the fact that this was a real laptop and it was Hunter Biden's laptop. And you could imagine somebody could have just asked Hunter Biden, hey, is that yours? Did you write that email? Is that your dick pic? Or is that you banging that prostitute? They could have asked them that, and someone would have had to put putting in deep fakes big time for it not to be his. It was obviously his. This letter comes up. So Anthony Blinken cobbles together all of these quote unquote intelligence officials with the idea of, we are going to bring these people together in order to say that this was Russian disinformation. One of the emails that Brennan sent. So right here, this went to Michael Morrell. It says, okay, Michael, add my name to the list. Good initiative. Thanks for asking me to sign. As you go down, it says, John, can I add your name to the list? We'll be adding I guess it's Leon, Sue Gordon, Jay Johnson, basically some of these other people, these other spooks. It says, and working on Dan Coates, Mike Rogers, and Tom Bossert. It says, and lots of other career folks. It says, trying to give the campaign, particularly during the debate on Thursday, a talking point to push back on Trump on this. So they understood. They understood. So for all of this talk about, yeah, well, we never really said it was Russian disinformation. We never really said that they were working with the Russians. We never really said that that wasn't his laptop. Nonsense. They knew exactly what they were doing. They put that information out there on the debate for a mass psyop on the American public in order to push back on Donald Trump going after Joe Biden for effectively the corruption involving his kid. It was that. When they said it, they set it up with this idea of a big ticket item where a lot of eyes are watching all at once, like a debate. This is a great time for us to introduce it. People are not going to think too much into it. They will hit it and they'll just keep moving forward with it. Especially if you get buy-in from many of the other media organs who say, okay, well, this is Russian disinformation. We don't need to show it. Fast forward, that laptop is used to prosecute Hunter Biden. There's that. And fast forward to a year later when it's no longer an issue for an election. Okay, well, yeah, then everybody can bring it up, the fact that this is real. This was legitimate laptop of Hunter Biden. And yeah, there's some dicey, dubious stuff in that laptop. Just astonishing. Just astonishing. My point is that document makes it clear in the brimming light of day that they fully understood that putting that document out there like that on a debate, it would have allowed millions of people to hear Joe Biden point out, well, I mean, this has the hallmarks of Russian disinformation, and we have 51 intelligence officials that effectively said so. Don't give me this nonsense that, oh, we never really said it was Russian disinformation. We said it had the hallmarks. You see what we did there? You see what we did there? Good job. We're so clever. So clever. It is outrageous. So if he has taken issue with that, and he's putting a knife in the people who went out and lied to the American public en masse like that, I have less of an issue. I have zero issue with that. Zero issue. I don't like him going after federal workers. There's that. But that part, zero issue. Let me bring my man in. We are joined with Malik Abdul, the celeb himself. Killing it on CNN, my man. When I came in today, I was like, Malik has been killing it on CNN. You've been handling your business, my man. Political consultant. Wait a minute. Political analyst. I don't know if you do political consultation, but definitely political analyst, writer, Republican strategist, 15 years of public and private sector experience, and my former co-host. How you doing, man? You doing okay today?
I think we're going to start off with a good stream today. I'm hoping here. I'm using my phone because I realized that I did another StreamYard. Apparently, it's something with StreamYard because I did another StreamYard and it was the same issue. So I'm using my phone, so we shouldn't have a problem.
It could be. I know, like, for example, StreamYard doesn't work with Iran. So anytime you're trying to bring somebody on from Iran, StreamYard just doesn't work. Anytime I try to bring a Burundi or something like that, it failed miserably. It just would not connect. So yeah, it could be StreamYard. It could just be the way to do the data packets or something. Welcome to the show, man. You doing all right?
I'm doing pretty good. Of course, you know, it's been a busy few days here after my little CNN interview. And the ironic thing, and as I've been telling people, you know, of course, my DMs have been full. When I say full, you got the MAGA wing who are just hopping John mad, that I was critical in objective in my criticism of Donald Trump. And for people who don't know, there was a segment talking about
Right here. I'm not gonna play it. Right here. I'm gonna play my man because he handled his business. Frank Lentz is so full of shit. He is massively full of shit in this clip. And look, I don't have a bias per se against Frank Lentz. I mean, during the election, he did some good stuff in regards to some of the polling and stuff like that he was doing. In this clip, he is out of his mind. I'm going to play the clip of Frank Lentz and get our take on it, but I want to play you first. So this is Malik on CNN doing God's work. And just to prep the audience on this, the crash, just get so the audience knows what we're talking about. There was a crash with the Black Hawk helicopter running into an airplane. And when that took place, and when that crash took place, a horrible tragedy. I mean, it took place in DC. Mm-hmm. And we're like, okay, what the hell? Like, how does that happen? I mean, there wasn't radar, the pilot couldn't see it, the helicopter couldn't see it. Like, all of this stuff is very weird. Donald Trump comes out and says this, which honestly is one of the most racist things I've ever heard in my life, to be frank. This is Trump responding to that crash.
Came out with a directive to white, and we want the people that are competent.
How you can come to the conclusion right now that diversity had something to do with this crash?
Because I have common sense.
Because I have common sense. Diversity has something to do with the crash, and Trump knows because he has common sense. All right. So Malik goes on CNN, and Malik points out this is ridiculous. And he calls these people the woke right. The woke right. I love this. So this is Malik on CNN. This was a couple of days ago.
I know.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of, I know a number of people who voted for Donald Trump for the first time. They were so disgusted than what they felt was happening in the Biden administration. I talked to many of them this week. Instead of talking about the economy, I was fielding questions on whether or not the Trump administration wanted to stop commemorating Black History Month, Women's History Month, Hispanic Heritage Month.
This is the directive at a lot of the agencies, but DOD today put out a memo saying no more celebration of history months.
Or Holocaust Remembrance Day or MLK
So
Day.
I was fielding all of these questions. So when people said that they voted for Donald Trump because they were concerned about, the price of eggs and all of these type of things, because of Donald Trump's own doing, we're having to have this conversation about DEI. DEI, for many people, and I call them the woke right, it has become a stand-in for being Black and unqualified. And what I would like for the Trump administration to do, Susie Wiles, I love her, never met her, want to meet her one day. I want them to ask the team, what was our message coming out of this week? And if they say that they felt as if it was successful, then we're going to have a very long 4 years.
Can I make a
Brother, preach. The woke right. The woke right. And Abby goes further into that when she brings up this whole thing of like, maybe it's not people tolerate it. Maybe many on the side just accept it, meaning this is what they sign up for. This is, it's a feature. It's not a bug per se, in which case Frank Lentz lost his mind over the comment. Give me your take on this. So expand upon that. Because I know on TV, you only get 30 seconds for like a soundbite or something to that effect. But I think you're absolutely right. I think you're absolutely right. Nobody voted for people would accept a president having a pet project on the side, right? Like if I was in the UFOs, they may be okay with me looking into the UFO files because they know that's my thing. Providing I do the other stuff that I said I was going to do. I'm going to deal with the economy. I'm going to deal with the foreign policy stuff. I'm going to deal with all that. They'll give you a pet project. It is a different animal for there to be, let's say, a crash. And your response is, well, Pete Buttigieg is at fault and Joe Biden is at fault. And they keep hiring these people who are unqualified, who just so happen to also be Black or a woman. And we need to get rid of African American month. And we need to get rid of the Hispanic month. Right. And we need to get rid of, and it's like, okay, dude, nobody voted for you for that. That didn't even come up. And Trump say he was going to get rid of Black History Month. I mean, just nonsense.
And that's why I made the point. And of course, it caused their heads to explode about the woke right. Because the woke right, they are interested in that stuff. And I described the woke right in a number of ways, but definitely they are obsessed with race. As they criticize the left for focusing on identity,
They do
the woke right is solely focused on identity. They are focused on race. They are focused on gender. They are focused on sexuality. And in fact, they wake up every single day to give you an example, according to them, of how DEI has failed. You heard, or for those who didn't watch the hearing with Pete Hegseth, who by all accounts was not, it's hard to make the argument that Pete Hegseth was a merit-based choice. He was white, he was male, he was heterosexual, and he was conservative. That makes him automatically qualified. So when Donald Trump decided to jump into this whole DEI thing without any sort of evidence, and then had to, in a press pool, later clarified that he didn't have any information that DEI was responsible for this. What Donald Trump and many of the people on the woke right are referring to when they say, you know, this whole thing about the lawsuit, 1,000 people were denied jobs or something because of their race. They don't dig a little deeper to understand that the organization representing all of these people, it is a race neutral group of people that they are representing. The person who has been out front happens to be a white male. So the assumption is, even though it's not even true, based on the organization that's defending, that filed the lawsuit, the assumption is that it was 1,000 white people who were denied. It's literally not true. Not only is that not true, when you go and look at the numbers, I think about 73% of air traffic controllers are white. 80% of them are white men. I think there's about 6%, maybe 3 to 6% of air traffic controllers who are Black. Donald Trump decided to go down this DEI rabbit hole because it satisfies the woke right, who are absolutely fine with DEI meaning being Black and unqualified. I've said many times before that I think that there are elements of this whole DEI industry where they did themselves in. So this whole notion of anti-racist training, where you're going to unlearn racism and you're forcing your employees to take these anti-racist training. School districts across the country that, as a matter of, as part of the application, forced elementary age students to sign anti-racist pledges in order to be accepted into the school. Like, that is DEI gone beyond. But there are elements of diversity, equity, inclusion. And I go back to all the time that Donald Trump, even though it wasn't DEI to him, but it definitely was in practice, when he said that he would only choose for his next Supreme Court justice, no men were allowed. He would only nominate a woman to replace the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg. That is DEI. The woke right don't want to call it that. Donald Trump don't want to call it that, but that is DEI. When Justice Brett Kavanaugh, for his first law clerk class, when he became justice, he hired only female law clerks. Men were not allowed. No white men were allowed. You never heard discussions of Justice Coney Barrett being a DEI pick. When Joe Biden, though, said that he would choose a Black woman, then all of a sudden that became DEI. When you look at Claudine Gay, even though I had criticisms of how she responded, the former president of Harvard, how she responded to, I think that was the anti-Semitism or assumed such on college campuses. Right. Even if it's fine if you want to be critical of her, I was critical of her. But because Joe Biden said that he would choose a Black woman, she automatically became unqualified, even though at Stanford, at Harvard, where she served in administrative capacities, not just as a professor. She served in administrative capacities, but to them, that meant black and unqualified. So like I say, they're in my DMs. Of course, the angry left is doing what it's always done since I started my media career. They're the Uncle Toms, the Coons, all of that stuff. But the woke right, though, they're mad. There is no such thing as the woke right. How could it has nothing to do with race? Well, then explain to me, what did Donald Trump mean when he said that it impacted white people?
You could
The
see
whole
it all the
FAA
time
hiring.
on Twitter. It's they act like these people are out in the wood, like, in the forest somewhere by themselves. They tell you at every opportunity what they think about that stuff. And they are perfectly on board for that type of talk. I mean, do you remember when we had the bridge crash in Baltimore?
Sure
and
did.
where that barge effectively hit the bridge, it destroyed all of that stuff. And some of the stuff that was coming out was like the mayor was a DEI hire. As if
Brandon.
it had anything to do with the fact that a barge went uncontrolled and ran into a bridge. Like, this is nonsense.
They're attacking. I'm sure you've read about it, but if your audience hasn't, this the family of the female co-pilot at this this crash at Reagan Airport, they refused to release her name. Now, we don't know what the rationale was, but they refused to release her name because what was happening at the time is that you had people sharing that the main pilot, who was the trainer, apparently had 1,000 hours, but it was this female co-pilot who had 500 hours of training experience. No one knows what the threshold is. No one knew anything about it, but because she was a woman, and then they said, okay, we're going to find a random photo because somebody said that she worked in some capacity at the White House. They found a random photo of a white female Biden staffer, circled her face and started attacking her. It wasn't even the woman who died. They immediately went into attack mode to blame this white woman who did work. And in fact, I think her family later came out with a statement saying that she had served over a decade, I think maybe even 19 years, but definitely over a decade in the military. So she wasn't unqualified. She's done that job before. It was a freak accident, but it had nothing to do with DEI. And I'm going to continue to say it despite how it may upset people. This is an extension. See, years ago, the conversation we were having, you turn on the television, it was critical race theory. Everybody was an expert on critical race theory. You heard, and every time I have no idea what it means, or critical race theory. But
or affirmative action. That was the other
one. Affirmative action, even though, as the studies have proven over and over again, the largest beneficiaries of affirmative action are white women. When you look at, and I encourage your audience to Google DEI execs, and you will find, I think about 65 or so % of those in these DEI executive positions are white people. Of course they are. And this is the same across industries. The woke right decided that, even though I didn't agree with Al Sharpton's, we're going to go and, stand firm with Costco, and he's marching in Costco because they want to maintain their DEI policies.
Yeah.
If you look at the actual numbers, I went back and looked, 70%, actually almost 80% of Costco's executives are white. About 80% of them are white. So this notion that somehow DEI, Pete Hegseth, in his confirmation hearing, he went into the confirmation hearing, he's going to get the woke out of the military. He was not able to provide one example of how DEI has negatively impacted the readiness of our military. Not one example. And so what he started doing over the past few days is that he said that there was an informal quota system at the Department of Defense that he was going to get rid of. Bruh, informal means that it don't exist. This is just something that you made up. There is no informal quota system, which is why when media has asked, well, give us an example. There was a Republican who gave one example, and that example is that they changed the language from like you could no longer use mother or dad or something like that, but it was around language. It had nothing to do with readiness. It had nothing to do with readiness. But this is what they continue to push. And a lot of this is informed by the woke right. And I'd also say Elon Musk, because he pushes this type of stuff. And it is disappointing to me because I'm looking at this. I said, okay, once Donald Trump becomes president, Susie Wiles is going to close ranks. She's going to grab control of this. But it doesn't seem like that's happening at all, because I made the point in the video because I wanted her, because I name checked her. I wanted them to understand that at the end of the first week, Donald Trump talked about DEI. Great. Eliminate all the executive orders regarding DEI and all of this type of stuff. But it was at the end of last week where we were still talking about DEI, not the fact that when I went to the grocery store on yesterday, my local grocery store, that I was getting ready to buy me some eggs, though for a dozen of eggs, it's $7.99.
I know.
And I live in the quote unquote hood. $7.99 for a dozen of eggs. So we weren't talking about any of Donald Trump's economic policies. We were barely talking about immigration in the second week. The message going out towards the end of last week was DEI. You had Pete Hegseth still doubling down on it. You had Sean Duffy falling over himself trying to associate it with DEI. You had JD Vance trying to, are you talking about somebody drawing a crooked line to the truth? He was literally out there saying, well, no, okay, there is no evidence that this particular crash was the cause, due to DEI. However, if you look back over the years at the policies that the Biden administration has taken, DEI may be responsible for staffing changes. These staffing shortages existed under Donald Trump.
Exactly.
These staffing shortages existed under Barack Obama. They existed under Donald Trump, and they existed under Joe Biden. So I've been asking people, so when the FAA had these staffing shortages when Trump was in office, what did he do?
And by the way, the same policy, meaning there has been no policy shift. It's the same policy since Trump was in office to Joe Biden in office to now. So nothing has fundamentally changed in a policy standpoint. Oh, there we are.
What Barack Obama did, there was some type of change that Barack Obama during his administration made around recruiting and things like that. Congress passed a law in 2018 to end that. The lawsuit that Trump and all of these others are referencing stems from 2014 when Barack Obama was in office. So from 2014 to 2018, the policy ended in 2018. So this was during Trump's administration. So then what did the Trump administration do to change that? Nothing. They're talking now, and I get all wonky, but I'm sure many people have heard them talk about that the FAA was hiring people with, soliciting hires from people with, intellectual disabilities and all of this type of stuff. This is something else that I want your audience to Google. Google Schedule A hiring authority. The Schedule A hiring authority has existed in government probably at least for about 20 plus years. And it clearly states, so when you go and apply for a federal job, it will ask you, and in fact, not even a federal job, if you apply for a private sector job, they ask, Do you have any sort of I forgot how they just right. But under that, we're talking about everything from a no, they call it disability. Do you have any type of disability that you would like to disclose?
That's right.
And some, some websites will give you examples of what that is, meaning it can be anything from diabetes, congestive heart failure. If you have a history of HIV, if you have a history of PTSD, it is literally in a federal hiring authority. So Donald Trump and the people around him don't even know that the federal government has had this for years, and the private sector still uses that. It doesn't give you a leg up over anybody else, unlike veterans, because veterans, depending on where you are, don't have to go through the competitive process. It is a consideration that agencies can use. And what does that look like? At the Department of Veterans Affairs, where I work, as they're talking about disabled people, if you walk through VA headquarters, you will see people in wheelchairs. You will see people with missing limbs. You will work with employees who have PTSD, who are actually working at the VA on 100% disability. This is at the Veterans Affairs headquarters in Washington, D.C. So this notion that somehow, oh my goodness, FAA, they're hiring people with intellectual disabilities. Well, the entire government has solicited that. And if you don't believe me, Google Schedule A hiring authority.
Mm-hmm. There's also the Americans with Disabilities Act, right?
It probably came out of that. It could have come out of, I'm not totally sure. I'm going to look that up, but it very likely came from the ADA.
Yeah, but you can't discriminate against somebody if they have, if I may have an illness, but the illness may not affect my job, especially if there could be minor provisions that you can do to effectively help it. I mean, the entire point was for you not to discriminate. And against the VA, I mean, these people effectively gave their bodies for their country. How do you turn around and tell them, providing it's not a situation, if the person lost their eyesight, I don't want them flying an airplane, but that's kind of a given, right? If the person is PTSD, that doesn't stop them or negate them from working a job at all, especially, maybe not necessarily a flight, but at the very least working at the VA or working at some other capacity. Yeah, they gave their lives for this country in real terms. I don't know, man. It's a bit rich that because according to Trump and according to many of his acolytes, unless it is a white man, then they're suspect.
White heterosexual man.
Thank you. Because people judge as a gay man, and that makes him a DEI hire right off the bat.
Yeah.
And as I was telling my mom, I was like, it has nothing to do with Pete Buttigieg being gay, as him being unqualified. Meaning Joe Biden put him in that spot for electoral reasons, not because he was good at the job. Like, there's a difference in those things. It has nothing to do with his sexuality. It has nothing to do with anything else other than him just being bad at that job.
And the woke right and I think we talked, I think we did maybe talk about it a little when we had the show, but they've been sharing as an example to kind of prove that Donald Trump is right about Joe Biden and this focus on DEI. They've been sharing this hearing, the Senate confirmation hearing of Phil Washington. If you guys remember, this was the black guy that Biden had nominated for FAA administrator, who couldn't answer certain questions about aviation or something. But if you Google it, if you Google Phil Washington, you'll see many on the woke right sharing that as an example of how Biden was so focused on DEI that he didn't care about qualifications. Now, I'm one of those who said that maybe Phil Washington wasn't the right pick for FAA administrators. But prior to even being nominated, he had spent 6 years as the assistant manager of Denver's regional authority, which is kind of like their transit authority. He had spent, I think, 7 years as the CEO of LA Metro Transit Authority. So he had actually had more, and 24 years in the military. He had served in the military longer than Pete Hegseth. He retired at a higher rank than Pete Hegseth. He had had more executive experience than Pete Hegseth. He had managed larger budgets than Pete Hegseth. Before the woke right, he was the unqualified DEI pick, and Pete Hegseth was based solely on merit.
Well, its skin makes him better, Malik. He is the white skin. I mean, like,
Yeah.
this is like when it was pointed out the lens that this was racist on its face.
Oh,
like,
I didn't talk about it.
Yeah, but it's like when that's pointed out the lens, and Lenz's response to that is, well, people should stop talking about race. It's like, dude, we are having this conversation because Trump came out and said this nonsense. Meaning he
And that's, yes.
into the water.
And that's the point that I made, later on in that clip. I made the point is that the reason we're talking about this is because of Donald Trump. We didn't have to be talking about this week. Donald Trump decided to talk about it. And after the show, we stood around with Abby. It was about another 15 minutes where Abby and Frank were going back and forth on this whole DEI thing. And Frank was trying to explain the sentiment of the Trump voter and how they don't want to be called racist. What Frank refused to do, what Frank refused to do in that moment, and, I know how this stuff works, and I know how when people are being too cute by half. Frank agreed with us that Donald Trump shouldn't be talking about this, but he felt compelled. He took it upon himself to then speak for the aggrieved Trump voter, who in fact had nothing to do with the discussion at all. We weren't even talking about Trump voters. We were talking about Donald Trump's decision to blame DEI. But Frank's response, and that's why it was a bit of gaslighting there, because Frank then responds, but we should stop talking about race. Well, if we should stop talking about race, we need to start telling Donald Trump to stop mentioning how white people have been impacted by policies. And that's what that back and forth, and Frank shared it online. He kind of did a little, people were crying about it. They didn't want to give Frank a chance to speak. Now, I don't do that type of stuff, talking over people. I don't try to get into that. But Frank was being very disingenuous because he agreed with us, which was the point that everybody was making. We shouldn't be talking about it. We shouldn't be talking about it. But Donald Trump ensured that we would be talking about it. Let's start and stop there, not defending Trump voters from being called racist and all of that type of stuff, because it actually had nothing to do with the conversation.
Yeah, he was. It was such an aggravating interview. Because then he starts whining about nobody lets me talk. Nobody lets me talk. It's like, dude, nobody. You are literally talking now, as you say, nobody is letting you talk. It's just you're not answering.
That was for the camera.
Yeah.
That was for TV.
He wasn't answering what was being put to him. It was a very straightforward thing. It's like, dude, do you really think that without anything to back it up, the president coming out and claiming that a complete tragedy is because people were somehow black or somehow women, you think that's okay? And it's like, well, people should, we need to just stop talking about race. I mean, black people don't want to be a hyphen. They just want to be American. And I've spoken to Trump. It's like, dude, what does that have to do with the price of tea in China? That's not what we're asking you right now. We're not the ones who brought up the racial stuff. He brought that up. He decided that that's what he wanted to introduce into the conversation after a tragedy. I mean, it wasn't even, my heart goes out to the family. My heart goes out to this. We're going to do an investigation. No, he knew immediately. Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg, black people who are unqualified.
Yeah,
it's outrageous. And for whatever reason, Luntz couldn't, get past himself to say, yeah, you're right. That's outrageous. He shouldn't say that. I mean, it's just outrageous. And by the way, there is a DEI conversation, though, that popped up at the DNC convention. I don't know if you've seen this.
My goodness.
Have you seen this? Oh, this is great.
I've seen clips of it. I've seen that, and the another thing where I think some MSNBC, Jonathan Capehart, Simone Sanders, there was another clip, and I don't think that was, I don't know if that was at the convention or not, but it was, basically where Jonathan Capehart asks the audience, raise your hand if you think that racism and sexism is why Kamala Harris lost. Well, of course, everybody in the room raised their hand agreeing with that sentiment. They're still grappling with the win. And frankly, now I know who David Hogg is simply because of the whole Stoneman Douglas. I don't pay much attention to him. But the person who is now the chair, I've never heard of him at all. I don't even know who the guy is. They say that he's a wealthy guy. But even at that convention, even at that, whatever it's called, it was clear that Democrats aren't ready to win just yet.
They are out of their minds. And, when people, let's say when like Cenk Uygur, for example, or Anna Kasparian, they've done this kind of turn of sorts of saying, okay, maybe we're getting something wrong. Something is going wrong in this. And they would bring up the whole focus on trans kids and all of this other stuff. And invariably, the left would say, well, wait a minute, that's not something we were focused on in the race. That wasn't really a big deal to us. And it's like, dude, yes, it was. So you decided that y'all wanted to fight on that front. Like, it's as opposed to saying, okay, this idea that this child who doesn't even have the right to vote, who can't drink alcohol, can totally cut his balls off. And you think that's okay. That's unacceptable. Like, that's literally mutilation. Don't give me this nonsense. Like, oh, well, he knew. Nonsense. The kid can't even drink yet. The kid is not even allowed to vote yet. His frontal cortex hasn't even been developed yet. And you guys are so ideologically wed to this particular issue that you think it is okay, in some cases, not even to tell the parents. Like, this is outrageous. They decided they wanted to fight on that. And as evidence of it, the fact that they were giving Uygur such a hard time for even bringing it up gets across how out of their mind and whacked out they are on this stuff. So
and you know what? I think that because I'm not a, from his past history, that's why I'm not a big fan of Uygur. Because I've seen what they've done in the past when it comes to, but I do believe that there is at least a bit of sincerity in how they're going about this post-election. That is much different from people like, for instance, Charlemagne the God, who on one hand, he wants to blame, continue to attack Democrats, saying, you said that Donald Trump was, a Nazi and all of this type of stuff. Yet you're normalizing him when he was the person who was out there calling Donald Trump a fascist, challenging Anderson Cooper on national television to call him a fascist. And now Charlemagne the God is on all of the networks criticizing Democrats, criticizing Obama for sitting beside Donald Trump in a church, having a conversation with him. So there are people out there like we shouldn't be talking to Donald Trump at all. Really? He's the president of the United States. So people like him, I don't consider them sincere. Even Stephen A. Smith, for those, the sports guy, Stephen A. Smith, who now says that he regrets voting for Kamala Harris. Why? How is it that 2 weeks into Donald Trump's administration, you regret? No, you are straddling the fence. And that's my point about like Charlemagne and some of these others who literally just stuck their finger up to see which way the wind blows because they're being political weather vanes. I don't think that Uygur and some of those others are really being political.
Yeah, I don't take Uygur as being a weather vane per se. I think he is literally in this mindset of, okay, we're getting something wrong. Like something is fundamentally wrong with this. And, there may be a cynical element to it where he is also trying to get more viewers, considering that the fact that Donald Trump won, he may know that
that's a part of it.
Yeah. But I don't take it as being, and my audience completely disagrees with me on this, overtly and radically cynical in the way that some of these other people are. I think there's an element of sincerity to it of, okay, we are getting something wrong. Right. So this, I guess my point, that's a lot of wood chop. I guess my point is, when you see this clip, this gets across, they've learned nothing. Don't give me this nonsense. that, oh no, this wasn't our issue. This wasn't an issue that we really brought up. This wasn't a thing we had a big deal about. Listen to, he is going to try to explain the voting process because they've added a non-binary quality to the voting. It's bizarre. I'm going to let him explain it himself. And tell me if you understand this, because he had to bring another woman on to help explain this because it was so weird. This is the DNC thing.
Specify that when we have a gender non-binary candidate or officer, the non-binary individual is counted as neither male nor female, and the remaining 6 offices must be gender balanced. With the results of the previous 4 elections, our elected officers are currently 2 male and 2 female. In order to be gender balanced, we must elect 1 male, 1 female, and 1 person of any gender. So again, this is what we have to do for this vice chair race. We have to elect 1 male, 1 female, and 1 person of any gender. To ensure our process accounts for male, female, and non-binary candidates, we conferred with our RBC co-chair, our LGBT caucus co-chair, and others to ensure that the process is inclusive and meets the gender balance requirements in our rules. To do this, our process will be slightly different than the one outlined to you earlier this week, but I hope you will see that in practice, it is simple and transparent.
Wow.
Just the interviewer, he thinks this is simple and transparent. What the hell? Like, as opposed to, let's have an election. Let's be honest and fair when we're having this election. If you're white, black, gay, straight, trans, somewhere in between, whatever, God bless you. If you have the opportunity to win it, you have the opportunity to win it. If people think you're the best person for it, people think you're the best person for it. Instead of having that, it's, we will have 1 man, 1 woman, and 1 non-binary, and we will have and it's like, what? And keeps going, by the way.
Yeah.
There's further explanation where he tries to explain it, and it's clear as mud. And they bring another woman on to try to further explain this process of however they're trying to do with this. Effectively, I guess trying to have 1 man, 1 woman, and 1 person who's non-binary.
Now, what he was describing, let's be clear, is a quota system. Yes, it was a quota system. Now that is a quota system. It wasn't who's ever qualified. We're going to have and in fact, it didn't have to be a quota system because you're just choosing from a pool of candidates. You open it up to a pool of candidates and made the best man, woman, they, their, them, chim, whatever, win. But when you specify that we have to check off boxes in order for you to even be in the nominating pool, that is a quota system. And this is why, this is one of the reasons that Democrats lost, because people look at this and they shake their head, they scratch their head. It's like, what? Like, and these aren't necessarily people who were in love with Trump, in love with conservative policies. What they said was, oh, I'm sick of that. Yeah. Oh, I'm sick of that. And even to Frank's point, there are people who weren't just concerned about being called racist. There are men who said, you know what, I'm not a damn sexist because I don't support this, or I don't agree with abortion, or I don't agree. And what the left did, they demonized these people. So instead of just focusing on race, Frank's point about that there was a disaffected voter who ended up supporting Donald Trump for a variety of reasons because they were tired of being, not feeling as if they had a place in the Democratic Party and Democratic Party politics. That really is a legitimate conversation to have, because I know people who don't like Donald Trump, who voted for Donald Trump because they said, oh, no. The whole trans thing, the gender, transgender kids. I know so many men who were like, oh no, I ain't rocking with that. And they don't necessarily like Republicans at all. This was the other option. But what Republicans now say, what they need to be mindful of is that this uptick in support. Now, Donald Trump won the popular vote in the Electoral College. This isn't permanent.
That's
So, assuming that you're not going to have to do any of the things that you said you were going to do, once you get past the woke right stuff, we're talking about bread and butter, meat and potato like issues. When people said that they were concerned about the cost of goods, that is what's going to be on the table in during the midterms. And if the only thing that we have to offer, and then I say we as in Republicans, is that we ended DEI, and with Trump playing around with these taxes, saying and acknowledging that Americans might have to pay a little more. Okay.
Might.
Okay. That may work for people of means or middle class Americans, but people like me, and I'm throwing me in this, like who go to the grocery store and say, I can't pay $7.99 for a dozen of eggs. And I did not buy those eggs because I said, oh, hell no. I guess I just won't be eating eggs for a while.
By the way, it would also include pharmaceuticals. That was one of the other things he pointed out. Because he's acting like these tariffs are just going to be in a vacuum. Like, oh, yeah, we can pass this stuff and it's not going to happen. He is putting, what is $1.5 trillion tariffs on $1.5 trillion. Canada, Mexico have vowed to retaliate. China is going to retaliate. He is also now talking about putting sanctions on the European Union, which is, again, this is what I mean. This is like, it's so bizarre.
We didn't vote for this.
Nobody voted.
We didn't vote for this. Sorry, we didn't vote for this. I didn't vote for this, which is why I'm disappointed that they're not more succinct in their messaging, or like, how do you think that this is good? Like, how do you think that, you know what? We're making some moves. Well, I can tell you why, because for one, you're listening to Elon and you're listening to all of these people online who essentially slut. Oh, can I say that? I probably can say that.
You can say it.
Who slut themselves out for Elon's attention, where they ingratiate. I mean, you're talking about members of Congress now tagging Elon Musk, thanking members of Congress, thanking Elon Musk, the unelected billionaire bureaucrat, for his work. And Elon doesn't have to be accountable to anything or anybody because he doesn't work for the government, for the people who have for years talked about the influence of people like George Soros, the billionaire George Soros. He's getting these prosecutors, these DAs hired, these woke DAs hired in places all around the country for the party, for the movement. So concerned about that, they have no problem with a billionaire technocrat, genius as he is, essentially dominating and who seems to be leading U.S. government policy. They have no problem with that because they say he's one of us. Elon Musk ain't one of us. Elon Musk is an opportunist. At the beginning of last year, up until probably May, Elon Musk was supporting Ron DeSantis. In 2023, Elon was saying that Donald Trump needed to sail on into the sunset. It wasn't until June, the day that Donald Trump, of his first assassination attempt, that Elon then supported Donald Trump. But this was after, and I'm sure everybody remember, because so in the bag was he for Ron DeSantis. Remember Ron DeSantis's announcement on Twitter that was a total bust.
Right.
This is that same Elon Musk. So in love were, you know how I felt about Vivek Ramaswamy, and I always said he acted like a surrogate for Donald Trump during the primary. So in love was everybody with Vivek Ramaswamy, who, to his credit, was a staunch supporter of Donald Trump.
He was.
He was kicked out of Doge and ain't nobody thought nothing of him. Now he says that, well, it's because of Hatch Act and I plan to run for governor. Bruh, please. They kicked you out. They kicked you out after you started going after Americans on this whole H-1 visa debate, basically calling Americans lazy, They kick you out because of that. It ain't got nothing to do with you wanting to run for governor because you're not a federal government employee. So the Hatch Act don't even apply to you because Doge is not even a federal, it's a commission that Donald Trump has empowered.
Just to be clear, not just Americans, white Americans, meaning these same people who, the Steve Bannons of the world, the Hegeseths of the world, all of these people who talk about DEI and everything else, Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, two foreigners, effectively pointed out these white people are unqualified. They aren't energetic enough. They don't know enough. And so we need to go outside the country in order to get, of the foreigners and bring them into the country because they're hungry and they're educated, that can do the jobs, and they're brilliant. Yeah, they felt some kind of way about
We're
that.
concerned about prom kings and queens, and that's what we do. And despite America's innovation, over just America's history with innovation, somehow we're just concerned about the prom king and all of this type of stuff. It was a caricature of Americans that he leaned into, and the people around him said he got to go. And I know because they told me, despite what Elon Musk says, despite what Vivek Ramaswamy may say, that whole conversation around the H-1B visa debate is why he's no longer at Doge, a agency that he helped co-found with Elon Musk. And notice, you don't see people talking about Vivek Ramaswamy. He tried to go on this kind of podcast tour or something, and now conservatives, these same social media influencers, are distancing themselves for Vivek because they have no more use for him. They have no more use for him. And the fact that people aren't saying, well, what happened to Vivek Ramaswamy? Why aren't we talking about him? Elon Musk is an opportunist, and he can decide next month, I'm over this. I'm a billionaire. I don't need money. I don't need any of this. I am over it. I don't like Donald Trump. Elon Musk wants access. He don't care about money. He doesn't even care about relationship. Elon Musk is solely concerned about access to the most powerful person in the world and what that access brings him as far as his bottom line. He wants all the data. He wants all of this. This is what Elon Musk wants. He is not sincere in this America First movement. No, Elon is about Elon.
Yeah, not even American. Steve Bannon is right. And his take on Elon Musk. I look, you and I share an opinion on this. I fully believe everything you're saying on this one is right. He's an opportunist. The Washington Post, and I'll let you go after this. The Washington Post apparently put out that Elon Musk donated or invested $288 million into Donald Trump's campaign. This is a hell of a lot more than what we were even aware of going into the election. That's assuming the Washington Post is correct. Hell, even if that number is 100 million, that is a lot of money to invest in somebody. And again, the reason you're doing that is because the access is worth more than the money that you're effectively investing into the person. The USAID thing, for example, is a really good example. Elon Musk doesn't have any top secret clearances, and yet he is going to USAID and looking, basically trying to get access to behind the scenes files. Apparently he's running the Treasury Department. Where does he get the capability to do this? There's nothing under the law that effectively allows this. Donald Trump has just willed this into action because of his association.
And there are going to be some lawsuits coming up soon because Elon Musk now has access to Treasury's payment system. The senior career official at Treasury resigned because he refused to give Elon Musk access to that information. And there was a standoff. He ended up resigning because now the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, gave Elon Musk that access. This Elon Musk, and I don't know if you saw the tweet from Donald Trump on yesterday saying that he was going to stop funding going to Africa because of what's happening in Africa, South Africa, where the land on the whole story is, there's been a history of this, but what the story is apparently, allegedly, is that white South Africans at least according to them, are
Historically.
having their land confiscated and stuff. And so Donald Trump tweets out that because certain groups in South Africa are being impacted, that he's going to stop all funding to South Africa. Who's South African? Who is the South African that Donald Trump knows?
Elon
Who is the white?
I pointed this out once before. Like I've met white South Africans, and some of them thought that the system was better under apartheid. And then you get Elon Musk going out there giving Nazi salutes and whatnot.
Mhm.
I don't think that stuff is random at all. I mean, he is effectively trying to boost the AFD, trying to get them elected. And then, look, from my point of view, the AFD has merit in regards to the way that the liberal class has effectively ran the country into the ground. So, this is not me being entirely ideological about it. Germany chooses whoever Germany wants. But I'm pointing out that I don't think it's a coincidence that he is boosting the AFD, saying, hey, you should be proud of your German heritage, and then is out there giving full-blown Nazi salutes. I mean, like, hand on his chest, thrusting his hand out. It's like, okay, dude, you know what that is. Don't give me this nonsense that, oh, he's autistic, he doesn't know any nonsense. And now he's effectively going after South Africa because the ANC has a mandate in order to reform the wealth distribution in South Africa, something, by the way, that they've been failing to do. And they've been failing to do it to such a degree that you've got the group that was the segregationists that have been able to worm their way back into the ANC government at this point. I mean, they may be calling it a unity government, but for all intents and purposes, that group had been locked out of the political process for like 30 years. The public wanted them to do their job. It was a revolutionary movement that won in regards to overturning the apartheid system. They have not.
And the irony of this, you guys go and look at Donald Trump's statement on this whole South Africa thing, is that he's concerned about how people who live in another part of the world are being treated, allegedly.
White people.
However, when it comes to the Palestinians, though, because we're concerned about how people around the world are being treated, unless you are then Palestinian. It's because we don't care what Israel does, which is why none of the funding cuts, none of the foreign aid will impact Israel. You're so concerned about what, and Donald Trump, and many people around him who are the non-interventionists, have no problem saying, well, I'm going to stop, even though it's not going to happen. Because I think Congress has to get involved in that in order for it to happen. But he just says, I'm going to stop funding to Africa because white farmers in South Africa are being impacted.
It's so
you talking about saying the quiet part out loud. Donald Trump has never been concerned. Donald Trump actually invested money into South Africa when it comes to AIDS, HIV, AIDS treatment, and all of this type of stuff. I never heard Donald Trump, even during the campaign, talk about South Africa, but now you can connect the dots. Elon Musk is white and South African, and I don't think that he was a naturalized U.S. citizen until his 30s or something. This is all Elon Musk, and what's going to end up happening, and I've said it before, Elon Musk will be the death of Donald Trump, and I don't mean that in a physical way. I think that he will pull Donald Trump in such a direction that it will be disastrous for his presidency, because Donald Trump, whether he sees it or not, Donald Trump is allowing Elon to go well beyond what any commission should do. But what's going to happen, much like we saw with the judges saying, okay, well, I'm going to block this plan that you have for ending federal aid. You're going to see a lot of lawsuits, and you're going to see some decisions by court saying, no, Doge, you cannot do that. And maybe that's part of the strategy. Donald Trump just want to get it to the courts to get Elon. I don't know. But he's going to be the death of Donald Trump's administration, because he means Donald Trump and his administration no good. It is all about his bottom line.
It's purely about what is good for Elon and nothing more. Man, always appreciate talking to you, my man. I was going to show the clip, but we don't have to show it. We have already talked about it. Malik Abdul, the man himself. He is a.
And I'll tell you, I'll be back on CNN Thursday, Friday, and Saturday.
Go ahead. If you keep
So
showing
I'll
up,
be
then you
back.
have to get your job, man.
Look, that's what they need to do. You know, I'm still unemployed.
Yeah, yeah. And look, that's how I got his Sputnik, right? It's like if I keep showing my face in here, somebody got to say, "Who's that Negro and why?" Like,
Oh, and tell
man,
your mom I said hello, by the way.
I will. In fact, she was the one who hit me up. She was like, "Malik is killing it on CNN." I was like, "Really?" And then when I finally saw Frank Lunt's video, I was like, "Malik is killing it on CNN. He is handling his business." I was like, "Go ahead." Malik Abdul is a political analyst, writer, and Republican strategist with over 15 years of public and private sector experience. My man, keep holding it down, man. You have a good one.
I will. All right. See you, Jamal.
All right, my man. Yeah, man. Malik has been holding it down on CNN. You heard him, man. It's fire. Everything he said out of his mouth today, I agree with. And yeah, Elon Musk is going to be the death of Donald Trump. And again, doesn't necessarily mean this in a physical sense, but there will be consequences for the lengths. And again, there's something grotesque about this idea that I gave you $288 million, and now you have all of this political clout in the administration for you to effectively maximize your profit at the expense of the country. Outlandish. I think that for any person who's willing to give over the governmental reins to somebody who just effectively bribed them. And for the South Africa thing, this was the clip that Malik is referring to. I just had that clip up. By the way, before going to that, the non-binary thing, I was sitting here laughing my ass off at this. So this is one of the original clips for the non-binary thing. Listen to what happens here, because he's trying to explain it. And I got to be honest, I've listened to this clip several times. I still do not understand what he is trying to communicate in this clip in regards to whatever program or plan that they have in trying to choose who they're choosing for this. You would think they would just say, who's the best person for this? Man, woman, gay, straight, anywhere between. And we will back that person. Basically, we'll vote for that person. That's not what they're doing. So they're doing this.
We're finding out ways to expedite this. Because of our gender balance provisions on this next ballot, you will be able to vote for 2 candidates of any gender on the next ballot. Okay? So on this next ballot, you will be able to vote for 2 candidates of any gender on the next ballot. If 2 candidates receive, I'm going to turn to Helen to clarify this last part.
You are in this next ballot where you have 2 votes. As the chair has said, you may vote for 2 males, 2 females, 2 of any gender, okay? No, you can't do that because we've got to balance. You could vote for 1 of any gender, okay? Or no, non-binary gender, excuse me. It is late, okay?
Like, the idea that you got to put that much energy into that is absurd. It, honest to God, it is absurd. I'm sorry. You've lost the plot. You've lost the plot. That is not the way that is supposed to work. It's like, look, man, I have pointed out on more than one occasion, I have zero issue. I love the fact that when somebody brings somebody on who's black, white, gay, straight, whatever, God bless. I love diversity in regards to the way that stuff works. But the objective of it is not a quota. The objective that you want to get to at some point is to be able to say whether this person is white, black, gay, straight, whatever, they're there, they're doing their job, just like anybody else who would be there and would be doing their job. And we have this understanding that they're going to do well just because they're a person. And we believe as a person they're going to do well. Now, they could mess it up, but understand that I'm messing it up because they're black, white, gay, straight, or trans. They might just be bad at the job. But the point I'm trying to make here is Lieutenant Uhura didn't spend show after show after show talking about the fact that she was a black woman on the Starship Enterprise. it was understood that she was excellent because she was on the Starship Enterprise and just so happened to be in the person who's doing that. This idea of continuously carving these people into boxes in this particular fashion, most America's not there. Most America's not there. And then she gets tripped up on her own pronouns. It's like, Jesus, man. In fact, I remember even in Star Trek episodes Discovery, every other day or every episode they're crying about something. And even one episode, the woman attacked, or the person attacked the person for getting the pronouns wrong. It's just outrageous. KJ, my man, how are you doing today, this morning? It's early for you. I always appreciate your pain in getting up to come on this show, man. Thank you for joining me, my man. KJ knows, a journalist, political analyst, and writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia-Pacific region. You're the person I want to talk to today, KJ. Thank you for joining me.
Pleasure to be with you.
So Donald Trump has decided to have an ideological war on all sectors in America and also abroad. So not only is he going after the intelligence officials who lied about the Hunter Biden laptop, not only is he going after the people who tried to prosecute him, not only is he going after all of these federal workers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of these sectors of the political spectrum and ideological spectrum, he's in a war with. He's in a war with the blob. But on top of that, he's also decided to expand that externally to other countries. So Canada, Mexico, China, South Africa, he's going after South Africa. And apparently the European Union is also on the list to take a knuckle sandwich from Donald Trump. To show like the level of disrespect that he has to Europe and Canada is mind-blowing. But again, they've allowed themselves to be into that spot. So he's treating them in the spot in the way he sees them. From your take on this, China has effectively said, I believe he's putting 25% saying tariffs on everything coming out of Mexico and Canada. But China, I believe it's 10%, but correct me if I'm wrong. China's response to this, or all of their responses actually, is we will retaliate. But China has added something else on top of the retaliation being a lawsuit saying we will take you to court over this. Now, Trump is using emergency sanction power in order to pull the sanctions off. There's some provision that the president has at their disposal where they can say it's an emergency. Yeah, they can say it's an emergency, and as it's an emergency, we can now do the stuff that under normal circumstances we would have to get either through Congress, or at the very least we would have to have all of these other processes come into play, like hearings, public opinion, all this other stuff. By going through the emergency process, you can avoid doing all of that and just pass the tariffs directly from the office of the presidency. This happened once before, correct me if I'm wrong, when Trump got in the first time around and he tried to do this kind of sanction war against China. China reciprocated their sanctions, targeting the farmers in various Republican states. If I remember this correctly, I vaguely remember this. But this happened once before in regards to this kind of trade war that Trump kicked off the first time around with China. At this point, it's not just China. Now it's the world that he's effectively doing this with. What is China's response to this? I know they said reciprocal sanctions. What are those sanctions going to be? Do we know? And what is the lawsuit that they're talking about filing?
So they're going to be filing a suit with the WTO. You know, the WTO, if you're a member of the WTO, you're committed to fair trade. You're not allowed to levy unfair sanctions. They're going to take it to the WTO. And China has done this type of thing before. The US is actually the country that has the most suits against it in the WTO. This is not going to go anywhere because the US has essentially disabled the appellate court of the WTO. So they will not be able to render a judgment. And even if they did, it would take years. So this is simply China stating that we are unhappy with you. We are going to take legal measures, but actually it's not going to amount to much. And I think they're holding their cards very close to the chest. I think they have a lot of quivers in the arrow, pardon, the multiple metaphors, but there are many things they could do. They could simply move tit for tat, right? It's not hard for China to increase tariffs, as you pointed out, like they did before. They could actually withhold certain categories of export. For example, rare earth minerals or critical minerals, of which there are, several score, 60 or so, that would immediately impact the United States. They have a lot of levers to pull, but my feeling is they're just going to sit back and just watch this for a while, because they're watching the chaos that Trump is bringing to his own government. And I think their theory is, we're not going to get in the way of this. We're not going to give him something to push or lean against. And how ironic is it that the U.S. is going after Mexico and above all Canada, right? I mean, you should have heard Krista Friedland, talking about Canada, the other day. I mean, everybody has their hair on fire. But it all boils down to the Kissinger dictum, right? It is dangerous to be America's enemy, and it is deadly to be America's friend.
Yeah, this seems so pointless to me. Now, I think, and this was something that, I've been having a conversation with people about prior, but this idea of spheres of influence. Marco Rubio gave a speech recently where, I forget who he was talking to. It wasn't Megyn Kelly. I forget who he was talking to, but he pointed out basically, the unipolar moment was a fluke. That's not something that there should have been any kind of real expectation for the U.S. to manage, this kind of Fukuyamas of the world, the end of history. Okay, well, that was a fluke. That was a unipolar moment. It wasn't necessarily the end of all things. And we are getting back to this standard spheres of influence. And so from Donald Trump's point of view, he looks at Russia, China being power centers. He may or may not look at Iran as being a power center. He does not look at Europe as being that way at all. I mean, from his point of view, Canada can be walked over. Panama can be walked over. Greenland, Denmark, these countries can effectively be walked over. They can't necessarily do anything. So he doesn't necessarily seem to give them this kind of basic, bare minimum level of respect that he would give, let's say, to a major power in the way that he seemed to look at Russia or the way he looks at China. It's very wild in the way that he's looking at this. But it sounds like he's just getting back to this idea of he's changing the way the world works. And trade or tariffs seems to be his way of effectively doing that. I mean, China may be sitting back and watching this, but let me ask you this. Are they going to has there been any talk about counter responses in regards to counter tariffs in the way that they responded last time? Because last time they tailored those tariffs specifically to the soybean manufacturers to go after Trump's base itself. It's like, okay, where are the areas that Donald Trump won in the election? Okay, we're going to target it to hit those areas so those people can effectively blame Trump for any kind of damage that they're taking on their farms. Have there been any conversation about this at all, or are they really in a wait-and-see mode? Because nobody else is in a wait-and-see mode. Canada is not in wait-and-see. Mexico is not in wait-and-see. And Europe has already said that they will be reciprocal if Donald Trump goes through with passing those tariffs. What are your thoughts?
Well, make no mistake, China has issued very, very strong words against the United States. They believe that, this, is very, very destructive of the relationship, and they're reminding the United States that they want a good relationship, and a good relationship is in the interests of all. But, going back to the first Trump tariffs, you have to understand that those original Trump tariffs, the Trump trade war, came in two stages, and they only got to the first stage. But the second stage was really a demand on China to change its governance, to change its economy, to get rid of state-owned enterprises, which are actually 80% of the economy. There's no way China would have gone for that. So China simply just, kind of threw them a few bones and then, dragged its feet and played them out, just played the game out. But it really was on the mindset of the United States. It was a demand to change the Chinese system. The Chinese wouldn't go for that. But what's interesting this time round is, of course, you have the tariffs which are being levied. Note that there are less tariffs being levied on China, 10%, as opposed to a U.S. ally like
I noticed that.
Canada, 25%. As I said, their heads are exploding. But what it boils down to is, I think, if you look at what Marco Rubio said, there's some very, very interesting things that he said. He essentially said the unipolar moment is over. We're in a multipolar world now. Those are words that you would have never, ever heard from the neocon Biden administration. Those words would have been stripped, from your mouth. You would have been flailed alive if you had said those words. And in a sense, it's a kind of a opposite. It's a chiastic echo of what Karl Rove said when the neocon project started. He said that we are an empire now. We are an empire now, and we create our own reality, and the rest of you can study it, but you just might as well, get along with it. So from saying we are an empire now to saying we are no longer an empire, the unipolar moment is over. We're in a multipolar world now. That is kind of an extraordinary admission. And I think, that signals that there's been a sea change both in the thinking of the Trump administration and the world that we inhabit. The other thing that we have to note is not simply the tariff war against allies, which is sending the message that there is no such thing as allies. We're simply looking out for ourselves. This is the realist world in which we inhabit. It's a world of power politics. Countries may have their regions of influence, but you, because you are not powerful enough, and because you are sucking up to us as a vassal, that doesn't mean you get a place at the table. It means that you are going to be on the table. And there's a kind of poetic justice to that, because they were thinking that by begging begging for the master scraps, that they would also get to dismember and attack China. And now, that has been turned against them. And so there's some strange irony there. The third piece that we want to note, not simply that we're in a multipolar world or that we are going to tariff our allies, but the US is currently in the process of dismantling, according to their statements, they're in the process of dismantling USAID, right? And these are the tools of empire. This is how the empire interfered in other countries and twisted them to its will. And so in a sense, they're, kind of burning their tools, they're getting rid of them. And it's kind of extraordinary because I think it signals, this kind of turn towards neo-mercantilism, which I had predicted, because Trump at the core is a neo-mercantilist. He believes in high tariff barriers and, cultivating domestic industry and looking at balance of payments, etc. This classical neo-mercantilism. And then the other thing, which I think is really fascinating, is he's dismantling the DEI regime. Now, this is really interesting because when the neocons took power, when the neoliberals took power, essentially they had to throw people who were oppressed a bone. And the red herring that they gave them was DEI. The real issue is class oppression. The real issue is economics. But instead, they were thrown the bone of culture and DEI. And it was a way to kind of distract them from, the class oppression and the class exploitation and the very, very real economic suffering, and to kind of do a misdirection towards cultural issues. And it was very effective. It made people riled up, and it really did create, a sense of divide and conquer. Although, essentially those people would have all been allies if they had really seen the issue correctly. So it created divide and conquer. And now what's interesting is that this regime has it's smoked its own dope. It's gotten high on its own supply, and it believes that this DEI, red herring, which is simply a smokescreen, they believe that really was this kind of Marxist conspiracy, right? It's not. it was the kind of replacement for a class analysis.
Right.
But they took it into their hearts, and they believed, they smoked, they drank the Kool-Aid and believed their own lies. And now they see that DEI itself was the issue. So now they're going to go against it and dismantle it. Now, what they don't understand is that you really need that constant culture clash, just like you need constant wars, because you want to distract people. And if you dismantle it completely, as it looks like they're taking serious steps to do that, then essentially you've gotten rid of this, smoke screen, and now you're going to be seen in your naked glory for the imperial exploiters that you are. So this is very, very foolish, but it's a very interesting thing that they're doing, and they're undermining themselves 50 ways to Sunday. Same thing with tariffs. I could say more about that, but tariffs is just more of the same kind of undermining.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm glad, and it follows suit with this whole thing of, well, Democrats do this all the time. It's like, instead of dealing with the material realities that people are effectively dealing with, I'm going to put a black person or a gay person or a woman or a whatever into a position. And it's going to make people feel better about voting for that person because they're voting for somebody who looks like them. It's not whether or not the person is going to do anything materially different that is going to benefit that group in some fashion. It's more so, it's kind of like 60s politics. It's like, oh, Richard Nixon is putting in a woman in this position. It shows how progressive he is. It's like, okay, dude, we're in 2025, right? And you guys are still doing something very similar. And I'm glad that you put it in those terms, because we make the same argument when we're pushing back against it. It's like, you're sending people into classes. You are sending people into these kind of things where they can talk about the fact that some people are racist, or that some people are black, or that some people are whatever identity that the people want to ascribe to. It in no way changes the material circumstances on the ground. Meaning, it doesn't make me richer by you having this conversation with me, or by having a meeting every few hours where you have bringing people into a room to have this kind of conversations about identities and races. Again, it doesn't do anything to my bottom line. It doesn't increase my minimum wage. It doesn't ensure that I have a job that is going to last. It doesn't do any of that stuff. It is purely virtue signaling. But they don't see it. And so I also agree with you. I would point out racist people will be racist, and they tend to be ideologically driven in the way they look at that stuff. And so, no, they didn't look at it through this lens of, okay, Democrats are doing this purely because they don't want to deal with the real material realities that people are effectively dealing with. They want to effectively use identity in lieu of actual material circumstances. But they didn't look at it that way. They just looked at it as, these black people are unqualified. These women are unqualified. And if we just had a good white man doing that job, everything would be great. It's like, okay, but that's also just as much nonsense. I mean, Malik calls those people the woke right. And I think he's right. I think both are missing the boat on this stuff. And yeah, he has decided to go full bore with this kind of reshaping of the American experience, whatever that means. It's fascinating. It legit is fascinating. I mean, even the thing for the orthodoxy stuff in regards to war and peace. You're right. Donald Trump had no issue using USAID to try to overthrow Venezuela. None. Zero. And even now, when he's going after South Africa, okay, again, if you're playing this role where USAID and these kind of tools that the CIA uses in a clandestine way to overthrow governments, if you're going to play that role, play that role. You can't do this pick and choose stuff of, well, we don't like that government, so we're okay with using it for that. But in other situations, we don't necessarily want to use it because they tried to take me out of office using some of the same mechanisms, or the same people who uses the U.S. aid to get other governments out of the way were also the same people who were trying to get me. So I feel some kind of way about it, and I want to get rid of it. Again, that's interesting. I've never seen anything like it. And you know what's wild about this too? I've never seen a situation where they've lingered on this idea that America overthrow governments. Usually that is kind of like a quiet secret. It's the thing that people know, but you don't necessarily linger on. You don't really talk about it. Tulsi Gabbard, when she was given her hearing, And Tulsi Gabbard was asked, effectively saying, hey, my concerns about you is that you say things that are similar to Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin, or sometimes even Bashar al-Assad when he was in Syria. And as Gabbard pointed out, we are overthrowing governments. We are backing terrorists, people who I fought when I was sent to Iraq. Those are the people who we are effectively backing, and not just backing, putting in positions of authority and power. That is disgusting. It is amazing that you're okay with us doing that. Their issue wasn't that we were doing it. Their issue was that Tulsi Gabbard says something about it. And so it's like, it's very bizarre in the way that this operates now that they've decided we're going to focus on USAID, and we're going to out the fact that USAID was instrumental in overthrowing the Ukrainian government, that it's been trying to overthrow the Slovakian government. They've been putting pressure on the Georgian government. That is astonishing. I've never seen anything like that. I've never seen anything like it.
It is absolutely astonishing. And, once again, if we think of the first Trump cabinet or the first Trump presidency, I mean, this was one of the things that he was known for, was his refreshing candor. Call it, what you will. I mean, judge it how you will. But there was an incredible candor. He would talk about, South Korea and say, those military exercises are really expensive, and they are, and they're really provocative. This is verboten. You're not allowed to say these things, but he would say these things, and then they say, well, you think we're so clean, we're killers too, right? I mean, this is the kind of thing that you are not allowed to say. There's this kind of gentleman's agreement that we both have to kind of BS each other and just pretend that, we are not doing these things. And this folie à deux, folie à plusieurs, he, just kind of crashed that completely. And this is what the ruling imperial class was afraid of, that he would give away their secrets, that he would, do this kind of unmasking. This is why they were so furious at him. But once again, coming back to this idea, what is he doing? What is his strategy? What is he going to do? As I said, his strategy or his policy looks to be neo-mercantilism. Neo-mercantilism is not going to work because the US corporations are already at the monopoly phase. You have a market, corporations compete, and eventually they become monopolies. Once you become a monopoly like Microsoft or Amazon or, any of the other, major monopolies, essentially what you get is you get gouging and you get enshittification, because they don't have to do anything. All they need to do is gouge you. And then they're not going to invest and build up industry the way Trump wants them to do, because building up industry and doing all that stuff is risky and hard. Why do that when you can simply twist somebody's arm for financial gains, what we call rentier capitalism? You can simply financialize your strategy and gouge them for money. Why would we go to the hard work of building industry, building supply chains, marketing, selling stuff, when people don't even have money to buy things because we've screwed them so bad, right? And so that strategy is not going to work. But what this strategy of tariff is, it gives, once again, Trump a pretext with which to cut corporate taxes and possibly, high earning income taxes, and say we're going to recoup it in tariffs. But you're not going to recoup it. You've simply passed those taxes onto individuals in the form of a sales tax, because it's the importer who pays that, who will pass those costs onto the consumer, and that will drive everybody's prices up, and essentially that will run into inflation. And of course, the financial class loves it, because it means that they don't have to take a haircut, and they will be able to continue. Interest rates will be kept steady, and they won't have to take any hit on their financialized earnings. So it works for the ruling class, but for the vast majority of working class people, vast majority of people, it will be pain. It will be even more pain. And what I like to compare it to is, it's like you go to a doctor, but the doctor is a quack. They don't know anything. They don't know anything about medicine. And so, but they have to do something. and they're going to do something dramatic. So they say, oh, you have a headache, let me cut off your arm, right? You have bad breath, let's do some bloodletting. Okay, bring on the leeches, and give you some mercury to boot. This is kind of the situation that we're in, that we're in the situation where the pain and the suffering is real and obvious. 70% of the US population is living hand to mouth. Our life expectancy is decreasing. It's unthinkable that a developed state should have a decreasing life expectancy. But all of these, treatments are not going to help. In fact, they're just going to hurt us more. In fact, there's a good chance that they're going to kill the patient. So we have to be very, very careful about this. The other thing is, when Trump thinks in neo-mercantile terms, the other thing he doesn't understand is supply chains. I've said this before. Trump is a real estate magnate. And in real estate, there are almost no supply chains. Land has no supply chains, right? Mm-hmm. You either have the land or you don't. If you build a building, it's going to have maybe 300 components, 300 supply chain. That's not a lot. If you look at your average car has 30,000 components. All of those components came from somewhere else. If you look at your average, jetliner or, jet fighter, they have about 500,000 components. All of those came from somewhere else. And if you don't understand that imposing tariffs is going to radically affect, if not destroy your supply chains, you really have no concept of what you're doing. So once again, it's like, that doctor who wants to chop off your arm because you have an eye infection.
Yeah, I don't think he has an answer. I think he's stuck in this kind of box of the empire is declining. How do I get resources back into the country? Meaning, how do I reindustrialize the nation, especially and disincentivize all of these companies from going abroad and shipping their products back into the United States? So his thought is, okay, well, I can threaten sanctions with everybody. I can get the different, I can down the trade imbalance between US and other countries. And to your point, that's not going to work. I mean, if anything, you are increasing the cost for Americans. Like I saw on a thing where it was something to the effect of during Donald Trump's first term, he had put tariffs or sanctions on like $300 billion of goods. That number is up to $1.5 trillion right now. And we haven't even hit Europe, meaning he hasn't even gotten to the point of getting to Europe yet in regards to the sanctions or the tariffs that he wants to apply. We are already at 1.5 trillion. That money, that's going to affect us. Like that is higher prices that Americans are going to have to pay. And I would add something else. There is going to be a response from these other countries that are going to point out, this is the reason why we need to de-dollarize. This is the reason why we need to get away from the US dollar, why we need to get away from this market. This is problematic. This can't be trusted as a political instrument or as an instrument of liquidity, because at any particular random moment, the US president, any random US president, can decide to make all of these things weapons. Like that was part of the reason and the rationale for BRICS. And that rationale is only being solidified under Donald Trump's presidency. I just don't think he knows it out. And I agree with you. It's like, oh, you have a cold? Okay, let's amputate your leg. It's like, what? Trust me, it'll work. It's 5-dimensional physics. It'll work. It'll work. We just have to amputate your leg and everything will be okay. And it's like, dude, I don't think that works. I mean, you're effectively having a pissing contest with the entire globe. And yeah, it's just weird. It's just super bizarre. How do you think this is going to turn out, by the way? And this can be the last question. Do you think he's going to have any success with this at all? Now, he's had minor success. So dealing with, let's say, Panama, for example, Panama has decided to cut ties with China. Colombia has decided to take, I guess, the Colombian refugees who were in the United States who stayed here too long. Same thing is true with, there was another state. I think Venezuela decided to take back its people. But these are like very small, minor countries. He's not dealing with peer competitors on this, or even economic competitors in this sense. How do you I mean, there is no way that the US has enough clout to do this to the entirety of the world. Or correct me if I'm wrong. Is there a way that he can pull us off with the entirety of the world in the crosshairs?
I think it's a miscalculation. He may think that he can do that. He may think that by dealing with countries one-on-one, he can do that. And remember, he was very focused on having these kind of one-on-one relations. But notice he's going only after small fish, right? He's only bullying the weak, right? And this is something that, the bully sidekick needs to understand this. The bully sidekick, you get close to the bully because you think that will make you powerful. You don't understand that the bully can just as quickly turn on you, because that is a dynamic of the strong, forcing the weak to do what they want, and the weak suffer what they must. Right. This is the dynamic. Remember, Trump has said, I mean, people say, is Trump going to start a war, not start a war, etc. I have always said that President Trump is not anti-war per se, but he is against losing wars. I mean, this is the John McCain thing, right? He says, I don't like people, who are losers in a war, right? My champions are not losers, right? Yeah. So this is his mindset. He wants to show that he's powerful. He wants these kind of easy wins against foreign powers. This is why he's, throwing his weight around against, Canada, which is, by all, by all measures, it's simply a vassal state. And now the Canadians are going to assert their sovereignty. It's not going to work. It's going to look really, really pathetic. Same thing for, Denmark and, these smaller European states. They're going to be kicked around, pushed around, tossed to the wall. Is the same thing going to happen with China and Russia? I don't think so, because, to the extent that, the bully is rational, they know that you don't pick on somebody who's bigger than you are or as big as you are. And so that's not going to work. But I think we have to step back and ask ourselves, what do we really mean by work, or what is the real meaning of success? And I think that in a strange sense, Hegel used this term, the cunning of reason, which is this history moves in these like strange, convoluted ways, but gets what it wants. I think ultimately this will be successful for the rest of the world, because Trump is going to alienate all his former quote unquote allies, force them into the multipolar world, accelerate that multipolar world, just as the Biden administration did. Everything they did to try and block the multipolar world accelerated it. Everything they did to try and cut China off at the knees actually strengthened China, made it more powerful. Now they're coming out with AI for everybody, undercutting the US tech business model, which they were relying on to boost their economy. So everything that they're doing is actually undermining themselves. And so I think over the long term, how will it turn out? I think it will accelerate multipolarity, which will eventually force the US to a more realistic position vis-a-vis the rest of the world. And we see the early signals or the early understandings of that in Marco Rubio's speech.
Yeah, I agree with you. That speech was astonishing to hear, especially coming out of a neocon like Marco Rubio. And it gets across how whacked out of his mind Antony Blinken was. I mean, like, when the State Department is the State Department for a reason. It's not the Department of War. It's the State Department. The entire point is negotiation going through the State Department. And it seems that Rubio is taking that job, regardless of his own political ideology, is taking that job far more serious than Blinken took that job. I mean, there's the level of arrogance that are associated with liberals in this country, and for that matter, even in Europe, that is breathtaking. There's this weird moralizing thing where they seem to think of themselves as better, even though there's nothing to show for them being better. It's very bizarre. They can't even win elections at this point. So, KJ, man, thank you for this, KJ, man. I always enjoy these conversations. I always learn something about this. We'll see whether this works. I agree with you on this. I don't think. What's the saying? If you alienate everybody, you have more enemies than friends. In which case, you will fail in whatever pursuit you're going after because you have too many enemies. You can't unbalance the situation to such a degree where you can't compensate in the way that you're trying to manage. And I guess what he's trying to do is bring back manufacturing. But threatening BRICS countries, threatening South Africa, threatening Canada, threatening Mexico, threatening the European Union. Like at a certain point, you're like, okay, dude, you've effectively threatened the entire world. I don't know if it works like that. You can get away with this for one or two countries. And if you focus on a country, yeah, you can isolate them, kind of like prison rules. It's like when the thug wants to go after somebody in the prison, they bring the guy over to the bathroom by themselves, in which case they can do whatever they want to the guy. You can do that. But when you are doing this in the open, where the rest of the world sees it, I think you give yourself a problem. I mean, I could be wrong. We can see how it unfolds in the first, few months.
I absolutely agree with you. I think Trump is mistaking global politics for an episode of The Apprentice.
Yes.
And he thinks that he can threaten and fire everybody. But what he forgets is The Apprentice is a scripted show with a producer and a director and everything behind the screens. He doesn't have that anymore. And so there's a fundamental, category error, a misunderstanding of the situation.
KJ No is, oh, wow, there we are. KJ No is a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia-Pacific region. He's a contributor to the book Capitalism on a Ventilator, once censored by Amazon. It is available at iacenter.org. KJ, there's another location that you are, that you give your content. What is it? Breakthrough News, correct?
Yes, it's the China Report on the Breakthrough News Network.
China Report on the Breakthrough News Network. Definitely check him out. The man is fantastic. Thank you for this, my man. You have a good day, KJ.
Thank you. You too.
All right. We have come to the end of the show. Look, guys, if you dig this content, I want you guys to give it a like. I want you to share it. Smash that like button. Don't necessarily break your computer, but hit it with all the might and gusto that you can muster in this moment. Click the notification bell. I pop in at all times of the day and night. I tend to be an insomniac, so definitely hit the notification bell. Also, there was something else. Notification bell. Oh, if you really dig the content and you find yourself coming back here often, please consider giving through PayPal, Patreon, Super Chats. All of it helps, even if it's $1. As people I hear all the time, buy me a cup of coffee. If you want to buy me a cup of coffee, these shows tend to get demonetized. And so anything that you effectively give for this particular show goes into paying for the content. What is this one? Life sucked under Democrats. Yes. But I guess that's the rub, Ellie. I don't have this belief that they're going to be all that great under Trump either. I mean, look, there's, like I said, there's certain things that I find this to be a mixed bag. It is a mind-blowing reality when the neocon, Marco Rubio, makes the argument that this is a multipolar world. Now, keep in mind, under the Biden administration, multipolarity was seen as a, this was something that the U.S. was fighting against. This was something that the autocrats wanted. This wasn't something that was acknowledged or even accepted. It was, well, this is something that the Russians are saying. This is something the Chinese are saying. This is something that all of these other foreigners are effectively saying. But no, we're fighting for unipolarity. And I used to, even when I was doing monologues or whatever, I would point out how weird that is, that the fact that the political lines ended up on this notion of multipolarity versus unipolarity. Because in old days, if you're talking about the Soviet Union, you can make that argument of saying we are love and light, we're freedom and justice, we have a more open system, we have a representative government, you can go into shopping malls, et cetera, et cetera. You can make that argument, and people would agree with that argument because they can see it when they're going to the malls, they're going to the stores, they're doing these things that seem to be a far more open system and open society as opposed to the Soviet Union. Okay, fast forward to today. And one side says, we're a multipolar world. And you get liberals, Democrats, who would argue against that and effectively argue for this notion that no, we are exceptional. We need to be in a unipolar world. And it's like, wait, you're really making an argument for unipolarity? Now, whether you believe it is secondary to the point of you making the argument. The argument sounds utterly absurd. How do you make this case that the world should be with you in charge? It should be, meaning this is the way the world should be. This is the way the world should work. You should want me to be in charge. You should want me to be in a position of authority. You should want to see me as exceptional. It's like, okay, that's outlandish. It's absurd on its face. Like, what person do you know goes around telling you how awesome they are and that they're somehow better than you? And do you really like that person, or do you want to hit that person in the nose? Now, I'm not saying you should have any kind of physical balance. I'm just pointing out that that is not the person who you typically want to associate with. You would think that there's something mentally ill with the person running around telling you that they're exceptional, as opposed to, I think you're equal, I'm equal, let's have a rule set of the globe that acknowledges our own common interests and our common wants. Meaning, you may have things that you find to be necessary and vital to the way you pursue your objectives as a country, just like I will have those things. We will consider each other equals, and we will relate to each other based on our own best interests, with the larger context of each person have the things that they require in order to operate. Okay, that's different than me making this argument that I'm exceptional and that you are effectively a vassal and that I don't really have allies. We just have vassals and enemies. Like, it is a very weird win-lose, zero-sum dynamic that we operate under. And I'm saying every bit as much as that argument for the Soviet Union didn't necessarily make sense against, let's say, something like America, or let's say something like the West that come across as a more open society. I'm saying the unipolar argument sounds absurd. The moment that you espouse that and you say that to somebody, that I am somehow better, I am somehow superior, you should want me to be in charge. You should want me to be the only power source. Okay, nobody's going to accept that. Nobody's going to accept that. You're going to get eye rolls from anybody that is on any part of the world that is not America, or that is not one of your vassals in Europe. It's not going to fly. It doesn't work as an argument, and it doesn't work as a political positioning, short to anybody other than another American. And so to have Rubio come out and say that was a fluke, there was no way to maintain that, basically, that is not going to be objective. We're not going to reach for objectives that are impossible in this sense. No, this is a multipolar world. And in the context of multipolar world, we have spheres of influence. Russia is going to have a sphere of influence. China is going to have a sphere of influence. And we, America, are going to have a sphere of influence. That sphere of influence is going to be all of North America. So Canada, Mexico, Panama, Greenland, etc., falls all under our new Monroe-esque doctrine. That seems to be the way they're running with it. And so in the same way that Russia has gone into Ukraine, in the same way that Israel has effectively created their greater Israel, Donald Trump seems to come to the conclusion that Russia, China, India, Brazil, etc., all of these countries together create a formidable opponent for the U.S. Again, it's all zero sum from the way that the U.S. thinks. Creates a formidable opponent. And we no longer have the capability of being radically dominant, destroying the globe as a Galactus in the way that we did, let's say in the 90s or maybe even 2000s. Because that's true, we need to do something dramatic in order to ensure the integrity of the state. And the integrity of the state meaning we need to put ourselves in a position where we will be dominant, and dominant in our sphere. And our sphere, in this case, Canada, Mexico, Panama, etc., etc., etc. It seems to be the way he's looking at it. Now, the problem with this is obvious. How are you taking Greenland? How are you trying to make Canada the 51st state? How are you militarily threatening the Panama Canal? This stuff is outrageous. Now, he seemed to have taken this notion of sanctions as being a low-level, let's say, tool of war to go after these places and compel their behavior. Whether this works, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. But I am highly doubtful, and not just highly doubtful, I strongly suspect it's going to expedite whatever collapse that may be taking place. I mean, we were at what, 70 something percent in regards to the dollar being used as a reserve currency. And that number has dropped down to like 50%, maybe a little bit more. That is a hell of a drop in just over 20 something years. Okay, well, what is this going to do to that process? Is that going to speed it up or slow it down? Obviously, it's going to speed it up. It's going to make countries more inclined to say the dollar is a problem. They're using this as a weapon. This is a liability for us that we can't necessarily accept and tolerate. Don't get me wrong, they would glad hand. They would be very mild about it. But obviously, these countries are going to be looking for ways to mitigate the weapon that you're using against these countries. And if that's tariffs, if that's sanctions, they're going to respond in kind to ensure the economic integrity of the state. We'll see. I could be wrong. All right. I am going to say like it, share it, subscribe to it. We have Diane Thomas, Jamal, enjoyed the show. Great guests as always. KJ, Mark, Malik killed it today. They killed it. They killed it. So yes, agreed. Life sucked under Democrats. Yeah, but I think it's going to suck under both. I don't know, man. I guess I've been politically broken into having any kind of expectation of something positive taking place. It's kind of like you take a positive when you get a positive. I am perfectly here for the 51 intelligence officials getting their comeuppance. I'm here for that. You lied to the American public en masse in this kind of massive psyop. They knew exactly what they were doing when they were lying to the public, saying this was Russian disinformation, knowing full well that they were doing that in order to protect Joe Biden and give him a talking point during the debate for something that otherwise would have been difficult to deal with. I mean, if Donald Trump is effectively saying you guys are corrupt and your name is being used as leverage, okay, well, that's kind of difficult to deal with because it's true. And so at the very least saying, well, no, this isn't real. This is Russian disinformation. It gives you a talking point. So no, I'm not necessarily shocked that Donald Trump decides to put a knife in people that were willing to do that. Is it political witch hunt? Yes. Yes, it is. He's settling scores. Do I care in that sense? No, I do not. I do not. I want Gabbard and RFK to get sworn to their seats. Those are good choices from my point of view, especially for the spots that he's trying to put them in. So again, from my point of view, that's a positive. Getting all of these people fired, less so. Giving pardons randomly to people who are full-blown criminals who probably should have been in a cage. Again, not necessarily greatest. And I don't mean for all January 6ers. Some of those people should not have been there. I mean, some of those people were effectively treated miserably. But you had others who was planning to get guns from Virginia and have this kind of revolution if Donald Trump winked at him and gave him the hand sign. So, yeah, some of the stuff is horrendous. Some of the stuff is less so. What's wild to me, and I'll end it on this, there's something fascinating about a president that comes in with a plan. And I don't mean a vague general idea of, I want to do Obamacare. I don't mean that, where you effectively tell Congress, okay, write me up Obamacare, bring it to my desk, and I'll sign it. I don't mean that. I mean, you've done the presidenting thing before. It was calamity the first time around. And somewhere along the way, you got your mind right, and you say, all right, if I get the opportunity to do this again, this is what I'm going to do. And so the first day, you were sitting there for hours signing executive order after executive order after executive order. I'm not saying that these orders are good. I'm just saying it's the fact that a president had in his mind what he wanted to accomplish and came in order to do that. Now, there's all sorts of problems with this, right? Because as Malik pointed out, nobody voted for that. Nobody voted for you to do this kind of DEI nonsense. Nobody voted for you to have a trade war with the entire world. Nobody voted for you to do that. And, you know, to make this argument that are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? Okay, when they asked that question, people said no, they weren't, which is why many of those people chose Trump. But understand, a lot of that had to do with how much they were paying for groceries, how much they were paying for gas, how much they were paying for their house, how much they were paying in regards to expenses, how much money they were bringing home into their paychecks. Meaning a lot of that question had a lot to do with the economics of reality that we as Americans confront. What does it look like when on top of that, you are now increasing what people are going to have to spend? So not only are you now going to have to pay more for items that you might have gotten prior, well, that's especially if you had to get something that was from outside the country. You also have another trade war that is being directed at America in response to what Donald Trump is doing, meaning it's going both ways. That will increase cost because that cost is going to get passed down to the American consumer. It's not like the company is going to eat it. Eat it for what? You really think that a company is going to eat a cost for America's benefit, for your benefit? I'm going to eat this cost? A company's job is to maximize their profit. That is true for a company in Canada. That is true for a company in Australia. That is true for a company in China. That is true for a company in America. They're not going to eat a cost for Donald Trump. And you've already had Trudeau effectively saying, you know, try to find other people to sell your products to try to basically avoid America. Now, when you switch that to Europe, you would effectively be sanctioning the entire world. That is astonishing. That is astonishing. Luck with that. I mean, it seems like the objective is, well, we need to get manufacturing back into the US. Again, good luck with that. I think that boat, that ship has sailed. But understand, the only way that you would get manufacturing back into the US is if you are willing to pay more for whatever the particular product is. Because the moment that that product is back in the United States, you're going to have to pay an American wage, whatever that American wage is. So as opposed to paying the $3 that you might have been paying in the Philippines for this whatever, you're now paying $15, maybe $20 an hour to an American to do that particular job, which again is great. I'm happy that that guy has a job. That also means, however, that the cost of that product is also going to go up, meaning the amount that you're going to pay for X and Y is also going to be more expensive going forward. And Walmart, I would imagine, is going to take a big jump, at least by 10%, considering much of the stuff from China is effectively bought into the US through Walmart. So yeah, he's going to increase costs across the board. Going to increase costs. All right. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. I am going to say subscribe. And I will see you guys, if not later today. Oh, by the way, Wilmer Leon, I'm going to be on the show later today. It's going to be at 3 o'clock. But I got to be honest, I don't know where Wilmer's show is. So I guess it doesn't really help me giving a heads up, an indication that I'm going to be on the show. All right. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. And I am going to say subscribe. You guys have a fantastic day. Jamal Thomas Morning Show, episode 89. Signing off.